Dungeon Hunter. Chapters 81 to 100. Chapter 81 to 83, Angels. After checking the Tree of Origin, I also made sure that the Japanese dungeon's internal affairs were continuing smoothly. In particular, I recently imported treasure to Japan's dungeon, so the points there had increased. The average of 40,000 a month had increased to 55,000, so the effects were already visible. There were many people getting rich in Japan. Guyo the fairy in Japan's dungeon was alone, so he worked hard. The points were used to make a maze. The walls and multiple paths made it much simpler to hide the treasure. This was obviously different from Yihi. The goblins are still dominant. It was possible to identify the current state of the creatures in the dungeon with one glance. The number of goblins was in the 6 digits, and there was a 0.03% possibility of a variant occurring. It meant only 3 variants had been born: champion goblin, arc goblins, etc. This statistic was quite useful. Once the Tree of Origin started working properly, I was looking forward to seeing the uniqueness work on the saber tigers. It is unfortunate that the saber tigers don't have the dominant position yet. Tisk. I clicked my tongue. The number of goblins was significantly more than the saber tigers. It was because the costs and breeding rate itself was different. The lowest grade goblin could be purchased for 25 PT white. The saber tigers cost 5,200 point. The goblins could give birth to over 10 at a time, while the saber tigers were limited to half a dozen. In many ways, it was forced to take more time. Invest 500,000 more points. I will give you permission to use it. Really? I'm glad. Guyo jumped with excitement. Guyo had been anxious after I transferred to the dungeon. But I ended up giving him permission to use 500,000 points, so various thoughts of how to proceed passed through his head. I said in passing, "In the future, you will be granted further opportunities. Yihi, Guyo, and any fairies I get in the future. I can do well." Guyo quickly nodded. I was slightly disappointed with Yihi, so Guyo was more reliable right now. Of course, I would watch for a long time rather than make an instant judgment. Yihi and Guyo were so different from each other that there were advantages and disadvantages. My eyes shone. I should further grow my power. I was stronger than one demon. However, I lacked power compared to a faction. The situation was like that now. I burst out in the lead and needed to build that as much as possible without losing power. For now, it was going smoothly. But I wouldn't be able to completely disregard the factions in a few more years. I needed my own army. Just imagining it made me invigorated. There was a little bit on my mind. The past 2 years, there was little to threaten me at the moment. But my perception changed after they came through a hole in the sky. A special event has been triggered. Event, Angel Hunt, has begun. 7-dimensional gates have been created to Earth. Angels will appear through the gate and instinctively strike the dungeons. An angel's attack has the opposite property of a dungeon barrier and can neutralize the dungeon. If the barrier is broken, then the existence of the dungeon itself will be at stake. So please be careful. The event rewards are as followed. 1 Dominion's Angel Hashmal 5 million PT. 3 Virtues Angels 1 million PT. 10 Powers Angels 300,000 PT. 50 Principalities Angels 100,000 PT. 1,850 Angels 5,000 PT. Hunt more angels. Protect the dungeon and dungeon core from the angels. If an angel reaches the dungeon core, then they will declare it as a holy land. Holy land will reduce the strength of all demons while the capabilities of the angels will rise. Then, I wish all players good luck. A long message window emerged suddenly. At the same time, cracks started to form in the sky. I was deeply flustered. Angels? My expression wrinkled. My fists clenched tightly and my lips became dry. The cracks were forming in the sky above Korea. It was one of the 7 places on Earth selected. But, strange, I was disconcerted that the angels would appear already. In addition, it didn't make sense that one of the gates would appear in Korea. It was supposed to start after 20 years. The angels had also appeared in my previous life. It happened when the war was in full swing. More than half of the Earth was ravaged and there were approximately 20 demons remaining. The most powerful who had been filtered. They even had many creatures under them. Once the dimensional gate appeared, the angels were very easily defeated. It was literally a bonus event. In the 30th year, the archangels and seraphims had destroyed 2 dukes, but it took quite a while. Above all, The dimensional gate never opened in Korea. Things have changed. What was this? The future. Why? Because of me? My stiff expression couldn't relax. It had only been 2 years. Several small actions could have an impact on the future, but I might have influenced it. There was no way to comprehend why the future had changed. I climbed to the top of the dungeon and looked up at the sky. After a while, the gate ornamented with jewels to make it look like the celestial door opened and angels came pouring out. The celestial door opened and angels appeared. The number alone was enough to impact the spirit. The pure white wings and shining ring of light above the head symbolized an angel's presence. The angels in the sky looked around. They were a little confused and couldn't easily move. It seemed like they hadn't expected it as they carefully started searching all over the place. The celestial door behind the angels disappeared without a trace. What? Angels? The people on their way to work or driving cars were all staring at the angels in the sky. They gave off intense light when appearing, so it was natural for attention to be focused on them. Some angels raised their hands. Their hands produced a silver light, then formed giant parabolas. It looked just like a radar. And it actually was a radar. The angels seemed to detect something and moved en masse. The angels were facing Bukhan Mountain, the place where South Korea's dungeon existed. I started frowning. What to do? An intense holy power could be felt from the angels. Even if they fell to the streets, I would fail to capture all of them. I stayed at the dungeon's outer walls and gazed in the direction of the incoming angels. Dominion's angel Hashmal. I remembered the phrase that floated in the message window. Hashmal, an angel who spread God's wishes. An angel who couldn't be easily defeated. Numerous creatures and demons suffered with the arrival of Hashmal in my previous life. She emitted a light so dazzling that the eyes couldn't withstand it and flipped the battle around several times with her recovery. By the way, it was obvious that the angel with huge holy power was the Dominion's angel Hashmal. She happened to fall through one of the 7 gates into Korea. Fight? I couldn't just watch as they attacked my dungeon. But how much I should show was the problem. It was obvious that the owners of the dungeon in neighboring countries would detect the intense holy magic. It was truly a crisis. The demons didn't know I was in South Korea. I couldn't let them know. Grand Duke Upa would lead his faction to come and pressure me. Nobody could know my location for my absolute safety. It would be a large restriction on the time I needed to grow. The circumstances meant I might need to prepare for an all-out war. At the very least, I wouldn't be able to use gigantes. This was because I already revealed that power in the Demon World auction. It wouldn't be safe for Krasla and Chrisley. The same was true for the Griffin. If a high-class creature emerged, then they were likely to think of me first. First, 3 kilometers. The distance between the angels and the dungeon. No time. It was already happening. I couldn't avoid this and wait for other people to take care of it. Anyway, I wasn't sure of the situation, but it wasn't a small matter. A reversal. I could ride this event to rise properly. Conversely, I could twist my ankle and drop all the way to hell. So, I couldn't proceed alone. I got up from my spot. I took out 2 square, iron plates from my magic bag. They had a distinct silver color. I bit my finger and dripped the blood onto the 2 plates. Yeeing. At the same time, the silver plates absorbed the blood and started to shine. The auto golems, M1 and M2, have been activated. M1 and M2 were the strongest golems produced tens of thousands of years ago. Somehow the blood, heart and breath of the devil was stolen and transplanted into it. The iron plates soon started to take the shape of armor. 2 knights in full silver armor soon appeared. The size was 1 meter 80 centimeters and was similar to my strongest golems. It was common in appearance with the golems and faithfully followed its master's words. It was one of the 5 items I bought in addition to Sloth, the Statue of Abundance, the Body of the Earth Dragon, Astral Code, Sage's Leap, Smile of the Sun and Tear of the Moon. I opened Mind's Eye to confirm the detailed specifications. Name: M1, M2. Stats: Strength 87, Intelligence 0. Agility 86, Stamina 84. Magic Power 57. Potential: 314. Uniqueness: completed from the beginning. There is no more need for growth and there is no sense of self since its intelligence is 0. But the golem gives its best performance under a powerful master. Skill. Stampede, U. A warrior specialized for fighting. The physical abilities were on par with a high-class creature. The low magic power meant damage from skills would be great, but there was no worries if it could avoid the skills. Stampede, U. Was also a hidden card that could be used against enemies. Stampede would devastate the enemies the moment the golem activated it. It didn't end here. I pulled out one more vial from my bag. Wind powder was another one of the 5 items bought at auction. Depending on the amount given to the target, it could give a subject the fly, R, skill. Just like the name, it could the ability to fly. I threw the wind power at the golems without any hesitation. M1 and M2 would use it according to my commands. It would be enough to allow them to face the angels. The angel attack has begun. The dungeon barrier has received cumulative damage. The rare rating of the dungeon has increased the durability of the barrier. But it will eventually be destroyed if it receives attacks for too long. Barrier durability 4,999,341 5 millionths. Barrier durability 4,998,871 5 millionths. Barrier durability 4,998,094 5 millionths. The messages continuously popped up. I placed my hand on the dungeon core and activated my magic power. Gather all the intermediate creatures on the first floor. The words were used to move them. I conveyed my will. The dungeon rating added to my power. Hide my power. I don't know if the rest of my strength will suffice. It wouldn't be a problem if it was just the angels. The problem was the demons heading to South Korea. I wasn't ready yet. Time was needed. I couldn't use my main power. Barrier durability 4,996,099 5 millionths. The durability of the barrier was reducing rapidly. It would last 2 days at the most. The barrier would be worn out in a couple of days. I'll give it a try. I clenched my fists and moved my feet. The people were bewildered. A huge door appeared in the sky. Angels poured out and began to immediately attack the dungeon. They weren't showing hostility towards humans, so they must not be enemies. Humans should help, or leave it to the angels. Opinions were divided between these two options. If it was really angels, then it was natural for them to strike the evil dungeon. But South Korea was already battered by the monster wave, so they couldn't easily move. If there was an error in judgment once again, then things would get out of control. An obviously bleak future would unfold. South Korea, that was slowly becoming a stable society, fell into the abyss of confusion again with the appearance of the angels. Let's help the angels. They are God's messengers. We shouldn't go against the dungeon master. What if they fail? Then it really is the end. Won't innocent bystanders be hurt? If we help, then they can win. It is better than being slaves. No. How can we even help? It was tense. The gap between the two was narrowing. There were those who worshipped the noble dungeon master after the monster wave. The dungeon master was an existence that couldn't be touched. The pressure given off by the dungeon master was huge. Then the angels mysteriously appeared and showed them tangible hope. However, they couldn't easily move. There were those who firmly believed the angels were God's messengers. But the things they could do were very limited. They could only cheer with words. But then they heard the following news. China, Philippines, Myanmar, India, Pakistan, Indonesia. A large number of creatures are approaching from those directions. Citizens are asked to immediately evacuate to a safe place. Wing. The air raid warning sirens rang. All the TV channels organized to discuss the risk. In particular, the emergence of the large number of creatures that were heading to South Korea. Using a satellite gave them an estimate of roughly tens of thousands of creatures heading to the country. The countries they moved through wouldn't be able to stop them. In addition, it was determined that many of the creatures were really strong. It was concluded that they were all heading to South Korea. The end, it is the end. Congested roads. A man who heard the news from the car radio muttered. He jumped out of the car and looked up at the sky. There were hundreds of wyverns flying in the sky. Incense of valor. Water droplets of victory. Beads of passion. The remaining 3 of 5 items purchased at the Demon World auction. The items were purchased with a large-scale attack in mind, and the synergy of the 3 was good. Incense of valor increased the strength of his allies by 1 for 1 day. Droplets of victory raised agility when diluted with water, while beads of passion increased stamina, so they were all buff-type items. Regardless of capabilities, they were general-purpose items that were effective to use. The incense and water droplets were consumable items, and these items were more valuable in the second half. In a later time, I wouldn't be able to purchase it even if I had points. It seemed like I had to use these products immediately. I didn't expect to use it so quickly. Dungeon's first floor. The intermediate-ranked creatures were sorted by type. According to estimates, they roughly reached 1,500. This was a major power. 70 Nagas, 83 werewolves, 92 lizardmen, 47 dark elves, minotaurs and mammoths, and 40 dark bears. 563 saber tigers. The rest were accounted for with the trolls, lich, pyrox, 4 advanced golems, dwarves, and a few variants. Still, that power was only specific for the ground. The sky was an almost impossible situation. However, the angels weren't just hitting the outer walls. Soon angel troops would descend to the ground to enter the dungeon. I was prepared for that. The intermediate creatures were no match for the angels. The 1,500 creatures gathered here were to block the angels and creatures. I also left Krasla, Gigantes, and the Griffin on the top floor. I unconditionally have to protect the dungeon core. There aren't just angels. Demons and their creatures were gathering from the neighboring countries. They were also dangerous. Their armies were coming, so it was apparent that this was a big event. If it wasn't for Hashmal, then I would take advantage of their empty dungeons. My forehead wrinkled. It was certain that demons would appear with their main power. If only the Dimensional Gate and the Dominion's Angel Hashmal hadn't appeared in South Korea, then I could use the opportunity of the empty dungeons. It really was tough. I needed to think of all variables in order to cross the stone bridge. I couldn't just go on adventures. I needed to focus on keeping South Korea's dungeon no matter what. If I lost South Korea's dungeon, then my dream of becoming the devil would end up very far away. Chrisley, this will be your heavy responsibility. My dungeon master, don't worry. I have made some creatures from what remains of the body of the Earth Dragon. Chrisley knelt on one knee and told me. Her undead manufacturing, XU, skill. It was applied to the body of the Earth Dragon. There were 7 advanced 1LV creatures behind her. They were strong and reassuring supporters in this situation. You have to command the creatures to repel the invaders. Keep this in mind. I will keep it in mind. The demons weren't likely to become suspicious even if they saw Chrisley. Her appearance had vastly changed from the time she was trapped in the cage. Like a firefly under the full moon. Moreover, the quality of her magic power was much higher. It was impossible to think she was the same person. But, my dungeon master, how are you doing to prepare for the attacks on the outer walls? Chrisley glanced at me and asked. I looked at the entrance of the dungeon and said, I will use everything available. Quang, quang, an explosion of light. The dungeon barrier was in danger. Light gathered in Hashmal's hands and struck down from the sky like lightning. The light coming from the thunderstrike meant it was difficult to open my eyes properly. Hashmal then stretched out her 6 wings. The beautiful figure was enough to cause bliss. Hashmal's presence could be felt even from far away. The holy power extended from the wings and wrapped around the angels. It was to increase the recovery of the angels. Hashmal looked around and stopped the attacks. There were the Virtues Angels and Powers Angels as well. The Principalities Angels were holding bows of light, and there were more than 400 angels. An absurd amount of power to attack a dungeon. But Hashmal seemed to be frowning at something. Hashmal made a beautiful and cold expression and raised her hand. Then 200 angels and 4 Principalities Angels descended to the entrance of the dungeon. Their aim was to hit the exterior and interior of the dungeon simultaneously. Shah, Kiek. Not long after entering the dungeon, the screams of the creatures could be heard. The angels were cruel. The light weapons brutally killed the creatures. The troops entering the interior seemed to be sufficient. Hashmal waited a moment before resuming the attack on the outer walls. Pook! A black needle entered Hashmal's body. A strong poison seemed to spread through the body, but Hashmal purified the poison in an instant by spreading her wings. Once the needle was removed, she turned her head to look at who launched it. Damn demon! I told you to aim for the neck. There were several hundred wyverns. There were demons laughing among them. Hashmal quietly muttered something. Then a bright light poured into the air and hundreds of spears were created. The intensity of each spear was enough to cause a critical hit. The demons' expressions wrinkled like they were chewing poo. Damn. Spread out. The demons on the wyverns were leading thousands of creatures like transparent insects, dark warriors, banshees, death knights, etc. The number of demons reached 13. 13. A ludicrous number for South Korea's narrow landmass. The good news was that they were only aiming at Hashmal and the angels. But no one could know what would happen after Hashmal and the angels were hunted. Delit. I never thought someone so attached to Okolos's hip would come here. Shut up, Anastasia. I can still smell the awful scent of pandemonium sperm from you. What, you bastard? In addition, the demons gathered were from various factions. They wanted to show off their faction's power. In the center were Hashmal and the angels. Quang, quang. Hashmal continued making spears of light. The demons were filled with admiration at the strong force. As expected from the current carrier of light. I am wasting time arguing with you. But greed flowed from their eyes. There were only a small number of strong angels. This was a chance to get a large amount of points. They couldn't miss it. The demons and their creatures started to attack. There were more than 100 attacks aimed at Hashmal, but they barely did anything. And the angels received strikes from the creatures. Their faces were smashed and limbs cut off, but they quickly recovered thanks to Hashmal's power. It was like the angels were immortal, so the demons were astounded. Besides, demons were demons. They forgot about fighting with each other and focused on the main concern. They couldn't die half-heartedly after coming all this way. Quang. Observe the angels. Help God's messengers. While they were diverted by the angels, the creatures suddenly received a shower of unexpected attacks. The demons turned their heads to confirm the opponent. The lowly humans have lost their fear. Hundreds of awakened wearing skull masks had appeared. The proof of devil hunters. The awakened were all wearing different colors. However, the demons just laughed. Bugs. Nothing more and nothing less. It was an army of bugs that was showing resistance, but that was all. The demons just needed to step on them. They wouldn't be able to resist until the end. Rather, this meeting just gave them more points. Ridicule could be seen in the demons' eyes. A few hours ago, I realized that I was in deep trouble on the top floor of the dungeon. The functions of the dungeon core has been restricted thanks to the advent of the dimensional gate. The store of all things can't be opened. This message window greeted me. An unfriendly system. Time was lost. The system would have been friendly if it notified me of the event some time before it occurred. In my previous life, angels had appeared long after I lost my dungeon. Therefore, I didn't know that the store couldn't be used. It didn't matter how many points I had. I was convinced this was why so many demons suffered against the angels. They weren't prepared in advance. It made matters worse, but I couldn't panic. After calling the creatures to gather, I quickly left the dungeon. I made a short stop at Heaven's Will. It was my first appearance after a long time, so I ignored the attention I received. I opened the door to the Devil Hunter's room on the second floor. The scene that became visible, the team members were all watching the large TV in the center. Captain Nim. Yoon Hai was the first one to notice. Edward was right behind her. The other members quickly rose and bowed. Where did you go? No, I won't wonder too much. Lee Ji Hai sighed. She led the raid group whenever I wasn't present. The dark shadows under her eyes told of her suffering. How much stock of the masks do we have? Skull masks? There are 500 piled up in a warehouse right now. Watch them. I'm sure the number of masks will be lacking later. Yoon Hai frowned. There were 500. I shook my head and said, take all the masks. Lee Ji Hai thought it was strange. What do you want to do? Help the angels. Attract all guild members under the name Devil Hunters. You may use my name. Those people coming to help will wear the mask. The awakened who aren't in our guild might oppose. The black skull mask was the symbol of Devil Hunters. It was uncertain if other guilds would wear it. Make a prior announcement. There is no time. The emergence of a large number of creatures, will it be okay? If we aren't okay, then no one else will be okay. A short answer, but it was enough. Devil Hunters was Korea's strongest raid group, but they were also at a global level. The members were united by that pride. People knew it as a one-person raid group, but they shook off that stigma. I understand. I will move quickly to threaten the guild masters. Lee Ji Hai nervously licked her lips. She seemed to have made a decision as her expression became determined. It wasn't difficult to use the name of Devil Hunter's leader if she had Kim Yong-woo's help. I will come back in 3 hours. I turned and walked away while Lee Ji-hai shouted urgently. Yes, wait a minute, Captain Nim. You will really come back in 3 hours? Uljin, Gyeongsang Province. It was the next place I headed to after leaving Gangnam. I could fly there in just 30 minutes using the wind powder. It was thanks to my high magic power and agility. I've come to the right place. I slowly came down from the sky. I was accompanied by the mist-type creature, Shade. It looked like rain clouds were covering my entire body. I absolutely couldn't let my appearance be recognized. There were round-shaped buildings scattered around. Humans called it a nuclear power plant. A collection of vast amounts of energy. A place that held enormous power. A human technology that I had to give recognition to. I laid my hands on the thick cement walls and felt something boiling up. It was artificial, but it felt quite good. It was a source of power that made my mouth water. Lightning God felt it and started to actively move. I planned to touch it after a few years, but it can't be helped. South Korean leaned heavily on the nuclear power plants. If too many power plants died out, then humans would disappear. Of course, I didn't care how many humans would die, but it would slow down the growth of the awakened. I had planned to eat it in the future. Over the next 3 years, humans would create new energy from the core of the creatures. They would use it as the driving force to live without nuclear power plants. A valuable replacement energy. The cores obtained from creatures was due to the flow of magic power in the dungeon. If the creatures were killed outside the dungeon, then cores would still drop. But the cores of such creatures were rubbish. The demons once spent a large amount of points to research it. In any event, I had to move forward my original plan involving the nuclear power plants. It was due to the event. Lightning God, eat away. Lightning God popped out as soon as I said this. Its body instantly flew inside the power plant. It was only interested in the source of the power. Lightning God opened its mouth widely and ate the source. A message window flashed. Lightning God has consumed a tremendous amount of power. 1 gigawatt will be added. I frowned slightly. The efficiency isn't good. 1 gigawatt. It meant that Lightning God could only be active for 1 more minute. Maybe because it was externally assimilated, but the efficiency was the worst. But it was better than nothing. Besides, there were still a few nuclear power plants remaining. There were a few more nuclear power plants in the Gyeongsang province where I could obtain energy. I wanted that taste again and moved. After going to 7 power plants in 2 hours, I managed to raise my original 16 gigawatts to 21 gigawatts. The efficiency was lowered every time the energy was devoured, but I still managed to raise it. And I received the following achievements after eating the last power plant. A tolerable achievement. A number of the country's facilities have been destroyed. South Korea will now suffer from serious power shortages. 300,000 PT will be given. I nodded. I had expected an achievement from the moment Lightning God started. It was nice to get points, but they were useless right now. I needed power that would help me gain the lead in this crisis. 21 minutes. That was how long I could use Lightning God. I would only call it when necessary, but the duration had still increased. It would be difficult to get a steep rise in power even if I went to more power plants. At this point, I needed to return. The dungeon barrier's durability was steadily being carved away. It is a bit hard if I only use Lightning God. I was confident in fighting without Lightning God. I needed to make sure it wasn't detected the moment I used it. But I needed it. This was the best I could do for now. I murmured to myself and flew into the air again. I looked up at Hashmal. Pure white wings. Appearance full of majesty and dignity, an outwardly beautiful and flawless sight. But she was a Dominion's angel and evangelist, who carried the light. Hashmal was tricky in my previous life. An angel who tormented the demons for 1 year and 6 months. The most formidable thing was her stunning recovery. In the end, Grand Duke Ariel needed to use her patented skill, Abyss Sword, in order to defeat her. I was laying low. At that time, I did not go into the battlefield. I just watched the demons fighting from a distance. I would use my own discretion about when to interfere. Looking back, those were all excuses. But at this moment, I was looking at Hashmal for a different reason. Goosebumps. A holy power that made my skin crawl. I immediately opened up Mind's Eye. Name: Hashmal. Occupation: Dominion's angel. Title: * current carrier of light, epic, intelligence and magic power plus 6. Stats: Strength 89, Intelligence 87, plus 6. Agility 87, Stamina 83. Magic power 92, plus 6. Potential: 438 plus 12, 471st. Uniqueness: an angel that will spread light to the world. Skill: propagation of light, epic, barrage of light spears, epic, thunder of light, epic. Relative comparison: Hashmal, strength 89, intelligence 93, agility 87, stamina 83, magic 98, potential 438 plus 12, 471st. Randolph Brigzeal, strength 93, intelligence 77, agility 88, stamina 86, magic 96, potential 392 plus 48 500ths. Incense of Valor, water droplets of victory and beads of passion gave me plus 3 stats, but I was still slightly behind Hashmal. Total stats were 450. Even if there was a limit when alone, that's strength, an existence that could collapse the balance. She even had 3 epic grade skills. It was something that required at least 5 million points. I won't be a pitiful demon again like the first time. The number of creatures gathered here was almost 10,000. Hashmal could defeat most of them but would become exhausted. It still wouldn't be easy for the demons to win. There was a large number of angels assisting Hashmal. I needed to make a decision that would do more damage. If Hashmal was weakened, then she would be easier to handle. Observe the angels. Help God's messengers. The 500 awakened charged forward. Their capabilities weren't great, but it was a situation where numbers could give empowerment. A trickster suddenly appeared on the tightrope between Hashmal and the demons. Captain Nim, it won't turn out well if we don't scatter soon. Yu Hai said. The momentum of 500 masked people appearing was good, but that wouldn't last long. Don't leave my side, just handle the incoming creatures. I had no thoughts of moving significantly. I only had one intent. My original purpose was to conceal myself among the awakened. Abstain from using as much magic power as possible. No one should notice me. Seal everything else while using only one power. Turn them all to charcoal, lightning god. Cheek, the emerged lightning god asked. Who? I pointed my finger. Kyau. Lightning god cried out and started heading towards the demons and creatures. Chapter 84 to 86, Scene of Carnage. Transparent insect, an intermediate 1 LV creature that automatically turned transparent when it received the sunlight. It was the size of a child and wasn't very strong, but it was a different story if there were thousands of them. Vibrating its wings would confuse the enemy, and they pounced like a group of piranhas. The vibrations caused by thousands of wings was enough to cause a brain concussion and pain. Now over 1,000 insects were approaching the awakened. Electricity. Kung. Yu Hai took a stance like she was firing a gun and electricity shot out. She was showing a rare grade lightning skill. Many of the approaching transparent insects were swept away by the shock. Despite the fact that the insects were transparent, they couldn't fool the keen senses of the awakened. Water barrier. Li Ji Hai erected a barrier that was 5 meters in width and 2 meters in height. It was a new skill she learnt after the humiliation with the king bee. It acted to block the vibrations emanating from the wings of the transparent insects. All of the awakened gathered here were at a decent level. The transparent insects were the weakest among intermediate creatures, so the awakened could deal with them. Captain Nim, do we have to stay in this spot? Yu Hai wiped the sweat from her forehead after dealing with the nearby transparent insects. Edward was nearby smiling. Good. I nodded as I watched them. The combination of Yu Hai and Edward was good. The two of them had already handled 10 transparent insects alone. They would become some of the strongest heroes in the future. It was quite interesting watching their growth. Captain Nim? Yu Hai blinked. I replied with a flippant attitude. This fight is likely to be a long battle. We have to do it little by little. To be honest, I'll just be glad if I don't die. By the way, the 6-winged angel is really terrific. It is the first time I'm seeing creatures look so pitiful. The demons and angels fighting. It was an overwhelming sight. Hashmal was particularly overwhelming. She killed hundreds of creatures and was like an elephant stepping on ants. The demons initially tried to handle Hashmal but changed routes and aimed at the large group of angels. Even with recovery, severing the limbs or completely destroying the heart and brains would make recovery impossible. Hashmal couldn't take care of all the angels. And I used Lightning God on the demons. In fact, Lightning God devoured the random creatures that it encountered. If this situation continued, the angels would be defeated. But I didn't want such an obvious situation. My plan, I sincerely wished for them to destroy each other. The demons were perplexed as Lightning God appeared out of nowhere. They soon realized that Lightning God was a skill but couldn't find the demon or angel using it. The awakened didn't even cross their minds. It was unthinkable that humans would be able to use such skills. Of course, I wasn't a human. Come back, Lightning God. This much was enough. Lightning God had only been active for 5 minutes, but it gave a crack for the angels to counterattack. There was only a small amount of electric power, so I would only take out Lightning God when needed. Lightning God that was in the shape of a huge dragon disappeared like it was a lie. And it curled up in my body waiting for the next occurrence. M1, M2. Start. At that moment, yeeing, red lights turned on in the eyes of the auto golems M1 and M2 who were waiting. M1 and M2's role was simple. I ordered them to automatically repel any attack on the dungeon barrier. The 2 silver golems roamed the sky and showed considerable destructive power. The physical abilities alone were comparable to a high-class creature. They couldn't handle Hashmal, but the 2 golems could easily deal with normal angels. Swayak. The angels were persistent. They systematically attacked M1 and M2. There were heavy winds every time an angel pulled their bow. The wings of the angels contained holy power and were very threatening to the golems. But it was no use. The golems had a simple way of fighting. They would approach and grab the angel's wings with their hands. And then they would carefully rip the wings off. An angel's wings was a collection of holy power. It would take a very long time to recover. Hashmal's recovery also wasn't effective on it. The angels who lost their wings would fall to the ground and become the prey of creatures. Hashmal drew a cross with one hand and a circle with the other. Then the angels attacking the outer wall stopped. They rushed away from M1 and M2. A calm and excellent judgment. She correctly saw how M1 and M2 moved while dealing with multiple enemies. She had amazing concentration. M1 and M2 performed exactly like the command they received. They paused after the barrier stopped being attacked. Hashmal made a move at M1 and M2 after they stopped. KWA Kwang. Soon the thunder of light was everywhere. Stupid fool, you should look at the demons first to be your opponents. Saman laughed. Earl Saman, one of Grand Duke Upa's faction who was participating in the angel hunt. Demons attacking when the sun is up won't get any benefits. Tisk tisk tisk. The sun raised the capabilities of the angels. This was common sense for demons. Nevertheless, this was an event and they were confident. The demons felt a lot of pressure to take action. But Saman wasn't in a hurry. He was looking at the movements of the sun. He turned his head and looked at his creatures. Unlike the other demons, Saman wasn't accompanied by a lot of demons. Bugbear, Vampire, Werewolf King. Only 3, but they were more reassuring than the thousands of intermediate creatures. They were creatures that exerted a stronger force in the moonlight and were the angels' natural enemies. Now it is evening. You have come to my world. Hoo. Saman scanned Hashmal. The sun sank. The world was locked in darkness. No, the whole of South Korea was dark. It became a deep night in minutes. The glorious wings of the angels illuminated the surroundings. But their numbers were too small. Except for the 200 inside their dungeon, there were approximately 130 remaining. It was the opposite of the creatures. There were still many around. 7,000. 3,000 had disappeared in half a day, but the momentum was with them. Hashmal had a slightly weary countenance. There was no change in expression, but she didn't randomly make spears of light anymore like she did when the sun was up. It was a natural result after eliminating thousands of creatures alone. Earl Saman and his 3 creatures started moving. The bugbear was a type of black chimera. It was an accidentally born from a synthesis of an insect and dark bear. It was famous for being very brutal under the moonlight. Vampire, Werewolf King. No words were needed. Both were advanced 4LV creatures. They were especially stronger at night. They were capable of causing devastation among general angels. Kuahaha. Stop the angels. Saman cracked the whip. He smiled as they rushed towards the angels. The vampire changed into a bat and bit one of the angels. Blood flowed from the angel's neck. The angel that lost its blood trembled. The vampire's curse was the opposite of holy power. One bite meant the holy power's recovery wasn't effective. Werewolf King. He was a creature with the name of king, and the fighting style was also exciting. He quickly jumped at the angels. The wings were ripped off and the angels could no longer live. Hashmal gazed at them and made hundreds of light spears. The hundreds of light spears headed to the vampire and werewolf king. However, the sun was gone and stamina depleted, so it didn't have the same majesty as before. The speed and accuracy had fallen badly. Many intermediate creatures died, but the vampire and werewolf king weren't touched at all. You are just like a whore. My creatures will never die from attacks like that. Saman gave a huge laugh. Hashmal just produced hundreds of light spears again. But this time they didn't move. Instead, the spears joined together. Hashmal finished a 3 meters long trident. It was the first time she used a weapon in this fight. This meant the situation wasn't going well. The eyes of the demons shone. Break Hashmal's neck. This is our chance. The demons released their advanced creatures. It was expected that the intermediate grade ones wouldn't be able to do anything. Saman frowned. These fools. But your creatures are no match. Saman wielded his whip and the bugbear moved more enthusiastically. He added a few more advanced creatures like the vampires and werewolf king. They particularly had a natural enemy relationship with the angels. The demons started a full-scale offensive against Hashmal and the last Virtue's angel. Hashmal frowned. Pack. She took care of dozens of wyverns, but there was no end to the number of advanced creatures coming. Hashmal was gradually being pushed to the edge of a cliff. She was even vulnerable to the werewolf king. Kuahaha. I got it. Hashmal was within easy reach of Saman. Kyau. Lightning god suddenly bit Saman. Saman and the bugbear disappeared in an instant. I gave a small smile. This is worth entering. I was standing with the awakened in the middle of the battlefield. Hashmal was approaching the limit, but there were still hundreds of casualties, making it easy to catch a demon off guard. Thanks to Saman, Lightning God was able to eat. The demon hunt was successful. The effect of the title, Dungeon Hunter, has created one residual stat point. 500,000 PT will be given. A reward for killing an Earl. I was satisfied with getting an extra stat point. There were other demons who were good targets, but Lightning God ended up eating Saman. At that time, Hashmal's gaze moved towards me. She stared at me. She noticed. The owner of Lightning God was noticed. The question was whether the demons had noticed. I was helping Hashmal and the angels, so it would be annoying for the future if the demons noticed. I suppressed my maximum magic power, but there was no way of knowing. I stared straight into Hashmal's eyes. After a few seconds, Hashmal turned her head away again. Go on? I didn't know the reason. But her eyes weren't hostile. Captain Nim, we should step back. It will be dangerous if we stay any later. Li Ji Hai cried out from nearby. The strong creatures were rushing towards Hashmal. But there were many creatures remaining. The intermediate creatures were tough opponents for the awakened. The bodies of the awakened were exhausted. They were drinking potions to sustain themselves. The trolls and banshees were flooding the area. It was a situation where a single crack would mean losing their lives to a monster. But, I shook my head. Endure. We might die. Captain Nim, this absolutely isn't a good plan. Once the angels are pushed back, the humans will be their next target. Li Ji Hai stated. Hashmal and the angels were being pushed back little by little. They were clearly struggling in power. But my answer didn't change. Endure. This. Do you want them to self-destruct? No. Li Ji Hai wielded her staff with tight lips as she heard it. I expressed my intention to participate. I looked at the entrance of the dungeon. And Li Ji Hai, Yu-Un Hai and Edward stayed behind me while I waited for the moment. Chrisley clutched the death wand and said, we have to stop them. Our opponents are the angels and we will beat them with the power given to us. 1,500 creatures were assembled on the first floor. Among them were a large number of advanced creatures. And even if they were lacking power, they needed to desperately defend the dungeon. This was their last home. They pledged their lives to defend the Tree of Origin. Chrisley and all the Dark Elves were prepared. However, Julium was an exception. He opened his mouth with a very worried expression. Queen Nim, please step back. The angels aren't easy existences. After going through the treatment with the dungeon master, Chrysley had been appointed as Queen of the Dark Elves. Julium and even Krasla would listen to her. But Chrysley just laughed awkwardly. Elder Nim, what do I have to fear when the Lich and 7 Spartwa in the vicinity? Spartwa equals grown from the body parts of a dragon. Queen Nim doesn't know how brutal and scary the angels are. Julium trembled. Demon world. Julium spent a long time there and had seen angels step out of dimensional gates a few times. They were existences that tried to destroy all life in the demon world. Julium had to make an appeal for his life every time. Of course, the invasion from the heavens wasn't frequent. It occurred once every several decades. But the demon world received a huge blow every time. In a nutshell, the weak people would only die. Julium wanted to live near the world tree for this reason. He didn't want to always live with the fear of dying. On the other hand, Chrysley was young. She never felt fear towards the angels. So Julium wanted to maintain that. Don't worry, this degree isn't enough to make my body cold. Chrysley tried to dispel his worries and laughed brightly. She had become increasingly more beautiful and now there were no dark elves who could match her beauty. Julium's spirit briefly recovered. Julium, who recovered his mental state, said, "This old man will die to protect your life. Hoo-hoo, that is reassuring. Kung, Kwang." At that moment, the dungeon shook. The angels had launched their attacks. Soon a large number of them would be coming through the entrance. Chrysley gripped the death wand tightly. Get ready, the enemy is coming. 200 angels, 4 principalities angels, 1 powers angel. That was the number of angels entering the dungeon. The angels didn't seem affected by the darkness and marched into the dungeon without any hesitation. They were faced with the saber tigers. Grr. There were dozens of saber tigers in the vicinity of the angels. The angels held weapons made of light and moved to the saber tigers that hastily retreated. They seemed encouraged and followed. But it wasn't easy. The angels kept their ranks. The angels were simple but not ignorant. They realized this was a trap. Chrysley immediately introduced the lizardmen. The lizardmen were intermediate 2LV creatures of frontal confrontation with the lizards. Syrup, round wooden shields and scimitars. The angels wearing armor crashed into 50 lizardmen. It was very provocative behavior. It wasn't expected that the lizardmen could win compared to the 200 angels. It was for the commander to investigate the enemy's firepower. The 50 lizardmen took 8 minutes to die. The lizardmen were handled by 2 angels. The efficiency was enough that the principalities angels and powers angel didn't have to come out. It seemed to be an objective indicator. It is more than I expected. The angels. The dungeon's crystal ball. Chrysley could see the circumstances in the dungeon thanks to that item. The force of the angels witnessed through the crystal ball was intense. But it is fortunate, there doesn't seem to be many high-ranking angels. Julium sighed with relief. Chrysley asked with confusion, I heard that the hierarchy of the angels is diverse and complex. Is the difference that big? Yes. The archangels have a special existence, but otherwise there is a strict hierarchy. The powers angels are intermediate ranked like the dark elves. Virtues angels and dominions angels can confront high-class creatures alone. Climbing up the hierarchy. I have never seen the thrones, cherubs and seraphims, so I'm not sure how strong they are. Then there must be a heavenly king. That's right, the heavenly king is the master of heaven. Just like the devil is the master of the demon world. And it is possible for us to match the power of the principalities and powers angels here. Tension was finally released from Julium. Chrysley continued looking through the crystal ball before saying, I will throw more food at them. It is the turn of the werewolves. All, prepare the ceremony. The lizardmen, werewolves and nagas greeted the angels and died. A complete extermination. Their blood was scattered all over the place and on the angels' bodies. The sun in the sky would naturally remove the blood from them. But the dungeon was dark, so they didn't have that luxury. In the end, the angels could only move while covered in blood. They were facing the dark bears and trolls when the ceremony began. The ceremonies of the dark elves were unique. At first, it was just words and actions. But after a while, it started to exert a real strength. The ceremonies were different for each tribe. A skill that was difficult to describe. It was close to a transcendent will. And Julium knew a ceremony to curse the opponents. It was ancient magic that used blood to weaken the opponents. The angels were already covered by the blood of the creatures, so they couldn't avoid it. The dark elves gathered the resentment inside the corpses of the creatures. The dark elves' bodies trembled from this sentiment. A moment later, a saber tiger appeared with a dead angel in its mouth. Stick to the wings. The souls of the dead creatures will curse the angels. Julium passed over a dagger. However, the dagger was so old the color was dull. Her hand didn't want to touch it, but Chrysalie received the cursed dagger. She took a deep breath and stabbed the wings of the angel on the floor. Hia! A strange moaning sound. The sound was heard from the mouth of the dead angel. A wave of intense magic power that contained a curse was generated and rushed madly towards the demons. The angels felt it and looked confused. Julium, who was watching through the crystal ball, nodded. A success. The curse of pain. Then prepare to attack. We will drive out the enemies. So far the angels had received minimal damage. Once it was confirmed that they were affected by the curse, the chances of victory became convincing. There was only a small number inside. There were many more outside. As many creatures as possible needed to be preserved. At that moment, Chrysalie staggered. Her legs seemed to have become tangled up. The souls are clamoring. Lean on me. This was the impact of the curse. More powerful opponents would cause a strong recoil. If Chrysalie's intelligence wasn't over 100, then she would have fainted for a few days. Julium was startled and stretched out a hand. It is okay. There are those suffering outside this room. This is nothing. Chrysalie solidly placed both feet on the ground and started to move. Daytime. The evening passed. The moon gradually sunk and the reddish sunset appeared. Even so, Hashmal still hadn't fallen. The creatures relentlessly poured out attacks, but her gestures and facial expression showed she wasn't disturbed. Hashmal, it isn't an empty name. Awesome. Honest admiration. In fact, Hashmal was more suitable for secondary roles than combat. She was different from the angel in my previous life who gained tremendous achievements in 1 year and 6 months. So I tended to slightly ignore her. I thought she would reach the edge of the cliff and reveal her limits. But now the situation was enough to make me praise her. Other than Hashmal, there were still 80 angels left. In the end, it wasn't much different from Hashmal facing the demons alone. Current carrier of light, she could use that light. If I was in that spot, I imagined what would happen if that was me. Half a day, at most a day. I knew myself well. I would need to show reckless bravery. In addition, I was weak in confrontations with many opponents. Given that limitation, it was an objective judgment. But Hashmal's momentum still wasn't killed. The sun rose and her holy magic was being restored. It was like a sick person recovering. Thanks to that, the situation transitioned to a lull phase. The demons were gathering their advanced creatures for another offensive. It seemed like their stamina had also been depleted. This is hell right here. Yu Hai angrily said as she came to my side. Her once clean face was covered in blood and dirt. Too many things were happening to even think of cleaning it up. But the problem didn't end there. Currently, the members of his raid group and the surviving awakened were in the center of the battlefield. They were glad that the lull meant the frequency of attacks lowered. They were able to rest among the dead bodies of the creatures. Don't relax. I'm not planning to relax. My head is still pounding from the transparent insects. Yu Hai rubbed her forehead. I turned away and scanned the remaining awakened. From my point of view, the awakened were no different from newborn children. They were still learning about the battlefield. But they would certainly grow the longer they were on the battlefield. Initially they were scared by all the blood running, but now they were numb to it. They were sad about their colleagues dying but didn't linger over it. It made them realize their survival instinct. A moment to rest. The faces of the awakened were all exhausted. Even so, their eyes were alive. They were still wary of their surroundings. Of course, some wanted to flee. There were already 40 people who deserted. But most of them had crossed the river of no return. As soon as they broke away from the ranks, more than half of them was slain. But this was a blessing. Seeing the situation of those who fled would inspire them more. There was no way to get away from here except for victory. Captain Nim, do you hear that sound? Yu Hai, who was applying a potion to her injuries, suddenly heard a strange sound. The sound was coming from the direction of the dungeon. There are more angels? But why are they coming out from the dungeon? No, rather, why are they in that state? Yu Hai discovered the source of the sound. Dozens of angels were coming out from the dungeon entrance. All the awakened, angels and even the demons had wide eyes. They were the angels who attacked the inside of the dungeon. But they were in a bad state. Some had their wings ripped to shreds and couldn't fly, while others had their organs showing. "They're coming." The corners of my mouth went up slightly. Their appearance made it obvious that Chrysley was successful. And following behind the angels were a number of creatures. Kung, Kuuong. The first was an advanced golem. And there were the imposing figures of the lich and saber tigers. The demons made an expression like they realized something. There hadn't been any news about the creatures and owner of this dungeon. If it was just the creatures, then they could safely ignore it. However, the numbers were considerable. A single force with an absolutely outstanding level. But the dungeon master didn't seem to be visible. A competitor, an enemy? The two had similar meaning, but the situation might change depending on which word it was. However, they hadn't showed themselves in the past day. The lull was over as angels, demons and humans tensed up. In particular, the awakened had really tense shoulders. They cursed the fact that more creatures emerged from the dungeon. Yoon Hai had the courage to confess something after the atmosphere change. "Captain Nim, if I live through this, then I will boldly kiss you. There is no need." A shocking appearance. A number of creatures was blocking the entrance to the dungeon. All the demons and angels intently watched the dungeon. It was a silent battlefield as the attacks stopped. An extension of the war. There were all types of speculation running through their heads, so there was silence. In particular, the demons were really interested. The person who owned so many creatures of high quality. A duke or grand duke? If might account for why they didn't move from the start. However, the dungeon master's identity was shrouded in a veil. Only the creatures were revealed. The demons couldn't move easily without knowing what faction the dungeon master belonged to. If they made one wrong move, then they could be involved in a hornet's nest. There was a possibility this was the dungeon a high-ranking demon. So they watched each other while asking, "You?" with their eyes. Of course, they couldn't come to a conclusion. Everything was just a guess. They could guess the intentions if the creatures acted, but for now, everything was just still. The creatures stayed at the entrance of the dungeon and didn't move even one step. It was like they wouldn't move as long the dungeon wasn't touched. In fact, the silver golems M1 and M2 only acted to repel the angels attacking the barrier. They stopped moving after the barrier wasn't attacked anymore. What to do? The demons had attacked Hashmal without hesitation. Their interests aligned with angel hunting, so they easily moved. But they couldn't read the intent of the dungeon master. Maybe they appeared at the last minute to watch the show. But then the daylight fully arrived. They had no time to waste. They couldn't just stand there. In this situation, the demons had to come out. If they didn't move, Hashmal would recover her divine power. A long day of attacking the angels would repeat again. There was also a chance that the dungeon's creatures would move. It would be a problem if they decided the demons were competitors for hunting the angels. The demons would have to watch their backs. Half a day ago, the demon, Saman, had been fried by electricity. "I don't know which faction you belong to, but come out. If you don't come out, then I will tear down your dungeon." Marquis Anastasia yelled. A demon who was supported by Pandemonium. A demon who was impossible to push back even if 3 demons joined their strengths. He would be the first one out to cut the enemy. She knew that Pandemonium wasn't the owner of this dungeon. "Stop playing. Did you think you would get away with such an obvious move?" Marquis Delit said in a scathing tone. The demons gathered here didn't trust each other. Especially between 2 factions, that's just the way it was. "It isn't a trick. I will tear down the foundation." "Really? Haha. Okay, then try attacking the dungeon. I will believe the sincerity of your words then." Taking responsibility for her words. But Anastasia had a red face. She said she would crush it, but it was just a threat. It was to put pressure on the demon who was the owner of the dungeon. Delit raised his right hand with a smile. "Waste your time, and continue to struggle. I will take Hashmal's head." The hand was raised to order a march. The creatures ran towards Hashmal once again. It was a wise choice. Delit had calmly analyzed the battlefield. The demons had hesitated, however, the numbers were small. Hashmal was strong and would pressure them. Her recovery needed to be thwarted. There was an important change in the demons' movements. They ignored the dungeon and started attacking. On the other hand, there were those who still had doubts. Quack. Orc shamans chanted spells at death knights. A knight on horseback attacked Delit. Kying. What are you doing? Delit scowled as he fended off the attacks. The owner of the Death Knight was Anastasia. It is suspicious. This dungeon, does it belong to your faction? Are you trying to monopolize the points? You bitch, you finally went crazy. Angry words popped out of Delot's mouth. It was strange that they were attacking each other. In this situation, they shouldn't be at each other's throats. The common enemy, Hashmal, and the angels were in front of them. It was natural for the demons to be angry. The situation had become more complicated. Madness entered Delot's eyes. I will kill you. I will tear this bitch apart. That was the starting point. Small doubts had brought about a division. The main power against the angels was pulled out. Some demons were fighting among themselves. The creatures on the battlefield became deeply entwined. At that moment, help the angels, wipe out the creatures. Now the awakened starting moving. I smirked. It was a plan I hastily thought of. Taking advantage of the bad blood among the factions. They had barely united in the fact of the common enemy that was the angels. This superficial connection was easily broken with a little bit of confusion. The main part of this plan was the number of creatures Chrysley had left. Fortunately, she had achieved a huge victory judging by the appearance of the angels. Many creatures. It was likely that they would lose some power in this event. An itch behind them. In other words, a needle. It was natural that doubts would spring up among the demons. 13. No, there were only 12 demons left. Anastasia was a fish that had been caught. Even the awakened, this was a true scene of carnage. Wonderful. I praised Chrysley who wasn't here. Frankly, even half being left would be a success. I never thought only 1/3 would be lost. Chrysley's role was substantial. Confusion was created thanks to her. Now there were only a few hundred awakened, so they wouldn't be a big help against the creatures. It was at least enough to give Hashmal and the angels time to recover. We have only one thing to do. Endure. There is no need for anything else. My cry entered the ears of the awakened. Fighting and enduring were completely different things. They were capable of doing it. And Hashmal was looking down at me with strange eyes. The sun was shining. My original group of 500 had decreased by more than half. Sink or swim. It felt like throwing eggs at a rock. I was wearing a rare sword instead of wrath. I raised my sword to the sky and shouted, "We are the last hopes of our country. If the angels die, then our hometowns, parents, relatives and friends will be trampled on. Defend it." It was funny that I was discussing South Korea's future. But it was necessary. Small flames were ignited in the awakened. The awakened needed to hold on for as long as possible. In addition, it was risky for Lee Ji-hai, Yoon-hai and Edward. I couldn't lose them in a place like this. My objective was to make them grow in this battle, not die. Of course, I was there to ensure their safety. However, then it was highly likely that my identity would be discovered. That was the worst-case scenario. Damn it, I'll do it, even if I can't keep it. Ah, the awakened were filled with energy at my words. Hope. It was indeed a good word. The injured awakened with legs barely attached due to potions or deep face wounds also moved. They dedicated themselves to fighting the wicked creatures. Their spirits were already lost. Most of their fighting spirit was exhausted after a day and a half. They moved around the clock and had surpassed their limits. It was a situation where they could barely eat or drink. Just standing deserved praise. On the surface, I also appeared like I was struggling. Swing, Kwang. A huge spear of holy power could be seen from the ground. That's great. I lightly nodded. Hashmal. A cold light in those gold eyes that wanted to destroy the enemies. She finally finished charging. The second round had no earnestly started. It was too late by the time the demons realized something was strange. There were less than 5,000 creatures remaining and many were advanced grade. The disputes between the 12 demons stopped. Hashmal, who finished charging, was powerful. A much stronger feeling than when I first saw her. There was a tacit agreement among the demons for a truce. But it was too late. Until now, they just viewed it as a way to make points. Hunting angels was the best way to gain a large number. If they were too weak, crash. The demons here already knew it to some extent. They panicked and trembled as the attack headed towards them. Marquis Delit and Anastasia were also aware of this. They both had a similar number of creatures and were cursing each other. They had been diverted from realizing that Hashmal was the most important thing. Bastard, bitch. The two were in a miserable condition as they cursed. Their entire bodies were covered with wounds. Cold, insane eyes. Loose hair that was reminiscent of a madman. Anyway, the division among them had stopped. All the demons had one common thought. This won't drag out much longer. The game will end while the sun is still up. A short-term battle. It wasn't good to drag time out longer. A clash of power. As the sun rose higher, the decisive time in the battle was approaching. Chapter 87 to 89. Hashmal. Master is stupid. Master is a jerk. Hying. The dungeon's 15th floor. Yi was sitting down and crying. After being deprived of all rights, Yi was only allowed to stay in one place. Her power was used to take care of the Tree of Origin. Yi was sulking in this spot. She wanted to go to the original garden she created with the bees. But the circumstances meant she was afraid to move her feet. Bees can't die. Yi has taken good care of them all this time. Give them snacks. It won't be a lot of bother. Yi was kneeling and praying with hands joined together. Help the bees live, she asked deep in her heart, but she had gained the displeasure of the dungeon master. She hated that more than the death of the bees. Therefore Yi didn't move during her punishment. In the end, all Yi could do was pray. Tree Nim, Tree of Origin, please take good care of Yi's bees. She opened her eyes and glanced at the Tree of Origin. Big. The bud had already grown to 5 meters. This was the first time Yi had seen something as rare as the Tree of Origin. However, the vitality in it was more than she could imagine. This tree can easily achieve Yi's wish. In fact, she knew she was just clutching at straws. By the way, what did Tree Nim eat to become so tall? Yi blinked and asked. Yi had seen the Tree of Origin double its size in just one day. She praised the frightening growth. Naturally there wasn't an answer. Yi grumpily puffed up her cheeks. And she closed her eyes again to pray. Cholbudak. At that moment, a sound of something falling was heard. Yi was deprived of all rights to the dungeon core, so she couldn't know if someone had broken in. Yi turned her head and looked at the source of the sound. What? Angel? An angel with one wing cut off was face down on the ground. The body was such a wreck that even Yi frowned. An angel shouldn't be here. But the terrible appearance caused Yi to press gently against the both sides of the temple. Yi was temporarily deprived of all rights, so she didn't even know the attack of the angels had started. The information of an enemy attack never came to her. She didn't have any freedom to act. Yi could only move between here and the top floor. Thus she was ignorant about the situation. An angel had suddenly appeared on the 15th floor, so it was natural for her to panic. The definition of a good or evil fairy was ambiguous. There was a thin line between good and bad. Angel, demon, or human was all the same to a fairy. Of course, they were aware that they were subordinates to a demon. So it was difficult. Why did an angel appear here? Usually intelligence would make they realize that the angel was an enemy. But Yi had completely different thoughts. Ah, Tree Nim sent it to me. Yi looked back at the Tree of Origin. Yi was convinced this was the answer to her prayer to take care of the bees. But Tree of Origin Nim. Yi doesn't think it is good when looking at the state of the angel. Can it really take care of the bees? The angel was in a serious state. Just before death, he didn't seem like he could take care of anything. Yi laid her hands on both sides of the temple and hummed, tilde. Right now Yi can't even buy a potion. Master has deprived Yi of all rights. I can't do anything to treat the angel tilde. She sighed with pity. Yi looked around to see if there were any other angels wandering nearby. At the same time, the angel's eyes flashed open. Origin, summoned, Hyok. Aish, you surprised me. Yi hastily retreated a step from the surprise. What? If you are alive then you should say so. Did you want to surprise Yi? The angel was badly injured, but Yi still spoke sarcastically. Whether she believed it or not, the dying angel continued talking until the end. Huge, warp, Hyok. Causality and destruction, decision, dispatched to demon world. Someone intervened, code change. The source of the summoning was this, please. What is he saying? Yi blinked. She had no way of knowing what the angel was talking about. The source of the summoning. Fairies were simple. They weren't deliberately insolent, but the angel passed away after saying such cryptic words. Yi stared at the tree of origin and gave her honest feedback. Tree Nim, tree of origin, I think you sent me a crazy angel. It was evening. The boring war of attrition ended and the full-scale combat started. The smell of burning corpses filled the mountain. The destruction of the surrounding terrain was already absurd. It occurred over a few kilometers. And, today the demons were slowly killing off the angels. There were a great number of advanced creatures. We will move back. Be careful not to get involved. I knew that today would be a short-term battle. Li Ji-hai asked me. It is evening, so shouldn't we help? She had realized yesterday that the angels were weakened in the evening. This was the moment when the angels most needed help. But my decision was firm. We are not in a state to help them right now. Despite giving them hope and strength, the awakened were at their limits. The awakened had been tense for 2 days. They had been forced to fight for 2 days so the hidden fatigue would explode. Li Ji-hai also knew this fact. Li Ji-hai bit her dry lips before stepping back. There were just over 100 people remaining, and they started to escape from the center of the battlefield. The demons and creatures showed no interest in the awakened. They were busy focusing on Hashmal. I backed away from the center and waited. The demons were starting to weaken. Hashmal was declining. They had been fighting for a few hours. There were shrieks as they desperately struggled. Meanwhile, I mentally connected to M1 and M2 and gave them a command. M1, M2. Stampede. A skill that dramatically increases physical abilities while decreasing the lifespan. Stampede, U. A red light burned in the eyes of the paused M1 and M2. I knew Hashmal's weakness. She was defined by her highly stubborn nature. Good was on one side of the line and evil on the other. This nature was revealed in my previous life. That nature meant Hashmal would continue to fight the demons, even if it led to her death. If she wasn't like this, then the war against the demons would last for 2 more years. This meant, she forgot everything outside of the enemy. I had planted the idea that M1 and M2 would only stay at the outer walls of the dungeon. After Hashmal and the angels stopped their attacks, M1 and M2 hadn't moved. Would Hashmal be able to cope if such a presence moved unexpectedly? Falling. Get her. The angel is tired and tonight I will obtain her head. Hashmal fell a little bit. The light of the holy power in her wings were dwindling. She couldn't easily fly in the sky. She resisted, but it was only a matter of time. The demons had excited smiles on their faces. 5 million point. It would make them stand superior to others. If they caught an angel, then the demon would be reborn as a powerhouse in their faction. Still, it wasn't easy. Hashmal was a Dominion's angel and her standard of exhaustion was different from common angels. She flew very low and put up a last-ditch effort against the demons and creatures. Annoying bitch. The demons clicked their tongues at her persistence. She still hadn't completely fallen. Hashmal knew it would be more dangerous if she fell to the ground. There were all types of creatures waiting on the ground for her. But there was only one place. A cramped space away from the creatures. The place of the awakened. Hashmal's eyes were conflicted as she tried to make a decision. The cause of that was me. Master of Lightning God. Maybe I was a demon. She might have noticed. There was no reason for her not to help the human awakened. She could give them blessings or recovery. She didn't do such a thing, so there was only one corner left. Come, greet me before you face death. Now Hashmal stood at the crossroads of choice. 6 wings. They contained a large amount of holy power and allowed her to fly. If Hashmal conserved the power by fighting on the ground, then she could bring down more enemies. But she couldn't come down to the ground if I was a demon. It was confusing. A demon who used lightning attacks taking on the appearance of a human to help them. It was beyond expectations. Hashmal couldn't determine what I was. Hashmal had been in the air when she first noticed me. But she hadn't yet noticed. Hashmal moved towards me and I quietly smiled. Captain Nim, the angel is coming here? Yoon-hai trembled and made a fuss. Edward, who was stuck like a gum behind her, was also surprised. No, it was all of the awakened who survived. Hashmal was almost on the ground when she was hit by a huge fireball. Yoon-hai sighed with pity. A sudden attack. Hashmal staggered and dropped. I jumped into the air and caught the falling Hashmal. 1 second was a very short amount of time. Hashmal's gold eyes turned towards me. Her eyes were asking, "Are you a friend or enemy?" But I just responded with a shallow smile. And Hashmal's hard eyes relaxed a little bit. "Captain Nim, please be careful." It was at that moment. Yoon Hai shouted, "Quack, Shawaruruk." M1 and M2 were stampeding through the creatures and were quickly approaching. When I purchased them at the Demon World auction, they were just 2 square iron plates. The demons didn't know of the existence of these 2 creatures. The physical abilities were comparable to a high-class creature. None of the creatures here were their opponents after they used Stampede. Hashmal was also at a loss. M1 and M2 had stayed at the dungeon's outer walls, so it was unexpected that they would appear here. That confusion occurred in the worst moment. The 2 golems wearing silver armor raised their bastard swords. Stab, puik, ah, Hashmal's death throes. I was also stabbed. My abdomen was stained with blood, but I didn't mind at all. Cut, followed by M1 and M2 slicing of Hashmal's wings. An angel's wings were their source of strength and defense. Hashmal was a Dominion's angel and her strength was very different. Her wings were capable of withstanding all types of attacks. But there was a flood of attacks from the stampeding M1 and M2. 6 wings. A total of 3 pairs of wings were cut off at once. Ak, Hashmal lost consciousness in my arms from the shock. Kaluk, blood poured down. It was a play I executed to hide, but I wasn't feeling so good. Captain Nim, Yoon Hai, Lee Ji Hai and the other group members headed towards me. I raised my hand and restrained them. Leave the battlefield. The angels will soon be wiped out. I don't know what direction the creatures will go. Retreat and prepare for attacks. There wasn't a lot of creatures remaining. Around 3,000. M1, M2 and the creatures from my dungeon were a threat, but there was no guarantee the demons would leave. It was easy to see what would happen after the rest of the angels were hunted. The hungry demons would order their creatures to ravage the surrounding area. Preparations were needed. South Korea was already in a miserable condition. They would be lost against an influx of foreign creatures. There would be a large number of deaths even if I sent Krasla. It would be an uphill battle to block them. Flop, Hashmal was knocked to the ground. Many demons and creatures desperately aimed for the fallen Hashmal, but M1 and M2 easily blocked them. And the Lich approached and placed Hashmal and I on his shoulder. "Where are you taking Captain Nim?" Fire burned in Yoon Hai's eyes as she ran forward with her lightning sword. However, the Lich was very high among the advanced creatures. No matter how strong Yoon Hai was, she wasn't a match right now. Piok, the Lich hit Yoon Hai lightly in the stomach with her staff and she collapsed. Edward hastily moved and grabbed Yoon Hai. "Edward, let go of me. We can't let them leave with Captain Nim." Yoon Hai twisted her body like a wild colt. But Lee Ji Hai and the other crew members forced her back. This was the last chance for them to escape. If they didn't leave now, all of them would be annihilated. It was very unfortunate, but it was necessary to make level-headed judgments. The female angel leader had her wings torn off. The defeat of the angels was confirmed. Now the only thing left was to prepare for the aftermath quickly. Yoon Hai wasn't weak, but there was nothing she could do alone. In the end, the awakened quickly retreated. The Lich moved in the direction of the dungeon. "Rotting Lich, give Hashmal to me, you slippery bastard. Don't snatch up our prey at the last minute." The demons weren't just quietly watching. The advanced golems supported the Lich. In the meantime, the Lich said, "Remainder, angels, take care of them. Our dungeon master only wants Hashmal." At first, it seemed like the voice was hoarse due to screaming. The torn voice of the Lich entered the ears of the demons. The Lich became more powerful in a place filled with corpses. KWA Kwang. He waved his staff and used the corpse explosion skill. The ground shook. "Hunt all the angels, then get lost. Our dungeon master, you are not welcome in front of the dungeon." Delit came charging out. "I don't know who the dungeon master here is, but they just made a big mistake. Grand Duke Pandemonium will never tolerate this. Kahuhu. If you wage an all-out war, we will not stand still. But I don't recommend it. An powerful and unknown mystery. The demons couldn't move until they had investigated the dungeon master of South Korea. It would be no good if they started a war between factions. It would just benefit the other two Grand Dukes. It hadn't even been 3 years. The Grand Dukes couldn't easily move unless it would give them an obvious advantage. This guy, Marquis de Lotte's body trembled. He had succeeded in hunting a virtue's angel and earned 1 million points. However, he didn't want to miss the big fish that was right in front of him. He wanted to kill Hashmal as quickly as possible only for his prey to be yanked away. Hashmal's stamina and holy power was reduced, but the most important moment was the last hit. An error in calculation. The Lich began to move. The golem escorted him and they succeeded in entering the dungeon. I poured a potion on my wound immediately after entering the dungeon. Air bubbles rapidly occurred around the wound. I was dizzy for a moment from blood loss before the heart of the Hell Monarch refilled it. Troublesome. Tisk. I clicked my tongue. This had been the best method to enter the dungeon without any suspicions. The dungeon would be monitored by the demons for a while. I needed a natural method to enter here. Congratulations on a successful return. Chrisley was waiting on one knee. I smiled at her and said, Chrisley, your contribution was big. While I was outside, Chrisley had blocked the angels inside the dungeon. She was very successful. Of the 1,500 creatures, 600 to 700 were still remaining. That was enough to have an influence on the demons. If it wasn't for that, there might have been a few more conflicts. No, my dungeon master. I missed one angel. I confirmed that he died in front of the Tree of Origin on the 15th floor, but it is still my fault. Chrisley was honest. This honesty was an advantage. I had to give credit to Chrisley for telling me the truth without trying to hide it. Due to the ceremony, Chrisley regarded me as a companion of the soul. She willingly told me her sins first. I shook my head. You missed one person, but it is meaningless if they die before reaching the top floor. Rather, I want to give you a reward. So what is your wish? Chrisley's expression suddenly became serious. She carefully opened her mouth. My dungeon master, could you increase the number of dark elves? I would have liked Chrisley to ask for something for herself, but it was difficult due to her nature. The number of dark elves. I touched my jaw. Their numbers had certainly been reduced due to several battles. Now there were only 30 dark elves remaining. I needed to increase that number to take care of the Tree of Origin. I will buy 150 healthy dark elves. I don't need so much. Chrisley panicked. She hurriedly denied it. She thought that adding 150 dark elves just for her was too much. But I needed to compensate Chrisley's efforts. Just think of this as a reward for everything so far. Apart from the contributions, you have made some good recommendations. I will fully compensate you. I would never have said such things in my previous life. But things were different now. I realized that there was a limit to acting alone and I should give generous rewards. Then, Chrisley contemplated for a moment before recommending several creatures. She judged objectively and told details about their contribution. They would be rewarded as well. Thanks to that, the compensation didn't take that long. Thoroughly defend the entrance and watch the movements of the demons. Report to me if there is any unusual behavior. I turned my body and walked away. The Lich with Hashmal on his shoulders followed me. Child, light is everywhere, and you will guide the light. Never be corrupted by darkness. Your role is to cleanse the darkness and conceive the light. Angels were born from eggs. After Hashmal broke the egg, the Heavenly King said that to her. Intermediate hierarchy. Like most of those in the higher positions, a Dominion's angel had a great responsibility from birth. They tirelessly trained in their skills. Holy power was shared, but the way they used it was up to them. Sometimes the other angels would tell extremely sweet stories of the middle world. She wanted to see it for herself one day, but reality wasn't easy. Hashmal was given tough missions. General angels were capable and most of the missions were related to the demon world. A place where it was impossible to feel dreams, hopes and other sweet feelings. She traveled through the dimensional gate to the demon world several times. And every time she came back, it felt like something important had been worn down in her. The demons were sworn enemies and the demon world a place that she needed to subjugate. Hashmal had great performances as a Dominion's angel. The multi-dimensional causality was destroyed. But the massive destruction is from the demon world. You will lead the angels to investigate. After receiving orders from the Heavenly King, Hashmal headed to the dimensional gate with troops. But something happened and the code was changed to an unknown place. It wasn't the demon world. It didn't look like the middle world. A different dimension altogether. But what is this huge source of magic power that I can feel nearby? She was at a loss for the first time in her life. The place felt both comforting and impure. She needed to be closer to confirm it. A demon's work. She started to destroy the dungeon. But the barrier around the exterior wall was hard. It wasn't easy to break despite the holy power of a Dominion's angel and several hundred angels. She became even more curious about the identity of this place. However, she couldn't destroy the dungeon. A number of demons and creatures had showed up. The demons were doing something here. She couldn't learn anything more. She intuitively felt that it wouldn't be easy, but Hashmal moved. She killed and killed. Over 2 days, she slayed thousands of creatures. And she had fallen into someone's arms after her divine power was exhausted, her wings lost. Ah! She jumped up. Sweat flowed down. Nightmare? She touched her back. Nothing. The wings? None. It wasn't a dream. The awful reality. Her wings were the source of holy power, so the loss meant it might take decades to recover. The sword stab wound was neat and someone had taken care of it. She couldn't easily organize her thoughts. It was obvious she had lost consciousness from the shock of losing her wings. It didn't make sense that she survived the demons and creatures. Once her flesh was dead, her soul would enter the cycle of reincarnation. This place? She wiped her sweat and looked around. A fluffy bed, a cool breeze, a strange place like an underground tunnel. A man sitting in a wooden chair and reading a book. The man closed the book and laughed coolly. Should we call each other acquaintances now? Anyway, it is delightful to see you again. Hashmal's expression was disconcerted. He currently wasn't wearing a mask, but she could identify him from the distinctive scent of magic power. But she couldn't easily open her mouth. I guessed the reason and shrugged. Can you not use the communication of the angels if you don't have your wings? The angels' wings weren't just for holy power. The angels could use it to guess their will and didn't need to speak important dialogue. A type of telepathy. Hashmal lost her wings and couldn't use it. Your identity. Hashmal realized her mistake and said in a small voice. There were no signs of panic. A Dominion's angel wouldn't panic at something like this. A sweet tone. The voice of an angel was beautiful enough to be compared to a siren. A creature that used singing to lure sailors. But it was worth comparing to a siren. In particular, Hashmal's clear and cold voice caused the ears to naturally focus on it. There were rumors that some high-ranking demons would cut off the wings of angels and keep them in cages in the demon world. After eliminating their pride, they would make the angels sing all day. They had an extremely shortened lifespan and only lasted 1 year. I thought it was just a hobby for nobles, but finally understood after hearing Hashmal's voice. What about it? It is a very unpleasant magic power. This is probably a big dungeon. Are you a demon? A strong enmity. She had been dubious when I was with the Awakened, but the dungeon convinced her I was a demon. You could say that. Hashmal's frown deepened. It doesn't matter. What do you want to do? Deception and cutting off all my wings. I don't know the reason for such a play. A little surprised. I had mixed in among the Awakened, attacking the demons and pretending to help the angels. M1 and M2 quickly moved at the right moment. An operation that turned out well. I have several anxieties. I wasn't sure Hashmal would be convinced I was a human and head of the Awakened, or if the demons would let Hashmal enter the dungeon. My answer was immediately discarded after I thought it. My nature was like this in the first place. Hashmal. It is simple. I am not a normal demon who appeared on this planet. It wasn't a difficult question, so I gave a light answer. Hashmal's questions only increased. You are not a normal demon? You have questions? But it is unfair if I am the only one answering. How about we alternate between asking questions? I don't compromise with demons. I clicked my tongue. Indeed, a stubborn angel. It was the way she was raised. It was the same for most demons. I was born weak on the battlefield. But there was some hostility to our natural enemies. I guess persuasion is useless. I looked down at the book in my hand. The book contained valuable information about how to convince the opponent. It was a weak area for me. The problem was that Hashmal wasn't an easy opponent to persuade. She would deny everything I tried. Hashmal, from here onwards, you won't have a place. Isn't that right? Hashmal didn't confirm or deny it. She traveled through the dimensional gate and appeared in a place different from the demon world. She was initially puzzled but sensed impure magic power from the dungeon and attacked. And now Hashmal was in the midst of that impurity. The reason why the demons are here, do you know? I could guess based on past experience. But it was closer to a certainty than a guess. The devil had made the earth an arena for large-scale invasion. This was a golden chance for the angels to take care of 4 Grand Dukes simultaneously. But they didn't. Only a scouting party was sent. The schedule was moved up, but Hashmal was still a scout. She was likely unaware of all this information. Hashmal couldn't reply to my mocking words. That's right, you don't know anything. You exist solely to be sacrificed by the higher-ups. And you couldn't even do that properly. It is truly laughable. Sophistry. It isn't sophistry but the truth. You would have seen it when you first appeared through the dimensional gate. High and solid structures that even the dwarves can't imitate. This isn't the middle world, demon world or heaven. This place, an entirely different dimension. And you would have seen something else. The numerous demons and creatures gathered in another dimension. Interfering in other dimensions is a taboo. The heavens will punish the bad ones gathered together. Group of bad people, then Hashmal. I'll tell you one truth. The demons want to destroy the humans and this planet. Ariel, Upa, Pandemonium and Okulos. All the Grand Dukes of the demon world and their factions have traveled here. And I am the only one hoping the humans don't perish. Rather, I am helping the humans deal with the demons. The possibility of Hashmal returning to heaven was close to zero. It was easy for me to tell her this. So you are not a normal demon? Different from other demons? Truly funny. A demon is a demon. What is the definition of a demon? Unpleasant magic power. A dark existence. Such existences are called demons. Haha. Demons are certainly accustomed to the darkness. But Hashmal, if you report on the features, then right now, you are not an angel. At least I've never heard of an angel who lost their wings. It isn't lost. You removed them. Then do you think you are equal to others? Having no wings means you don't have access to holy magic and you are only a little stronger than humans. No, you are just like a human. You are glossing over the truth. Don't you just want to show off that you have me? I know what demons consider a hobby. Kill. I felt a firm commitment. My brows furrowed. Once again, this method didn't suit me. It did not fit me at all. I spoke bluntly. Join me. I have already said it. I don't compromise with demons. Who? You will soon realize the benefits of leaving the heavens. I said after sighing. All the Grand Dukes of the demon world are gathered here. And I'm trying to prove my existence in an entirely different way from them. This means going against them. Should you really be hostile to me if you want to benefit the heavens? Are you saying that complying with a demon is a good thing? All Grand Dukes and their aides are gathered in this dimension. You will make a significant contribution if you sweep up all these demons. Hashmal's eyes turned towards me. She pondered on the reason why the Grand Dukes were gathered here. It was true that her mission was to get rid of the demons on this planet. In the first place, why are the Grand Dukes gathered here? What is the reason why they want to slaughter the demons in this dimension? The seat of the devil has been vacant for a long time. It is time to fill that seat. The conditions are very simple. Destroy the most humans and territory. The seat of the devil. God had told a story about Deathbringer. But she didn't believe it. You might think this is a prank or that I am desperate. In the demon world, there has been a war over the seat of the devil for far too long. You need to come to a conclusion. I stared into Hashmal's eyes. Golden eyes. There were some waves occurring in the calm lake. I slowly opened my mouth. Hashmal, I am walking alone. I am not affiliated with any of the factions of the Grand Dukes. I never even thought of entering them. Because, my gaze strengthened. I gripped my fists tightly. I have to kill the demons. I am a hunter that will kill all the demons on this planet. So I will climb to the position of devil. I smirked and said, this is an opportunity given to you. After all the demons are killed, you have the unique chance to stop me from becoming the devil. I will give you some time to make a decision. I will give you some time to watch the situation and determine the truthfulness of my words. I hope you think carefully. I turned and left the room. Hashmal didn't have any constraints and could act freely in the dungeon. Anyway, she had lost all her wings. I had the power of advanced creatures, so she wasn't a great threat. Even a Naga could eliminate Hashmal and then I would get 5 million points. But I expected to get some achievements if I could manage to corrupt her. No other demons can do it. No one had ever managed to corrupt an angel. The same was true in my previous life. It was a myth. My heart jumped quickly. I wanted to try corrupting an angel. But it failed. If successful, there would be benefits for a long time. And I used my own methods. Hashmal needed time to be convinced. I can hear more stories. This invasion was ahead of schedule. I might be able to hear a little bit of what was happening. I could use her if there was another invasion from the heavens in the future. I would be able to prepare or know the power of the heavens. At the very least, she was a Dominion's angel and familiar with other angels. There would be many benefits if I managed to corrupt her. I touched my jaw. After an angel passed through the dimensional gate, they can return to the heavens before killing all the demons. I identified this from my previous life. The angels who occupied dungeons could create a sacred zone that allowed them to resist the demons. But there were no angels that returned to heaven. This information was procured through a lot of effort. In my previous life, I was stubborn even in the face of death. There was also a chance that Hashmal would choose to die. But that would just be a useless death. She wouldn't accomplish anything. If she didn't cling to her stubbornness, then she would follow me. In the meantime, Hashmal would explore my dungeon and become curious about the tree of origin. Of course, she didn't immediately respond. Instead, she asked about the exit to the dungeon. She wanted to find out what was happening outside and see the truth of my words. It wasn't an easy proposal. The demons were still keeping an eye on the dungeon. It wouldn't be easy to deceive and pass by them. But that problem was surprisingly solved easily. I can go out through Japan's dungeon. That's right, we could move to Japan's dungeon. I used a few magic disguise items and had her accompanied by Krasla. A trip around the world begun. I couldn't give a lot of time, so they were to return within a week. And Hashmal returned exactly 1 week later. Hashmal had a very confused expression on her face. Her face hadn't changed much, but her eyes were shaken. It was small, but there was an impact. She checked other dungeons and witnessed the strong presence of the demons directing it. In addition, she saw the world unraveling. It wasn't too late. Leaving it alone would be a dereliction of her duties. She couldn't accept her death. She was stubborn but still an angel. Her mission was to bring back light to a world immersed in darkness. Hashmal looked at me for a long time before opening her mouth. I will never follow a demon. I will destroy all demons. Don't forget that you are also included in that. Pasik. I started laughing. Chapter 90 to 93. Achievements Store. Hashmal was worried. She was in the midst of confusion, anguish and speculation, so her decision was postponed. A strange demon told her to destroy the other demons with him. All the demons, including the Grand Dukes, had traveled here from the demon world. She thought it was a lie. She was a Dominion's angel. Any information about the demon world would be quickly obtained by her. She needed to do her best to wipe out the Grand Dukes. But despite not understanding the details, she needed to figure out why the dungeons appeared. First, I need to figure out this place. These dungeons are in a different dimension. I need to learn as much relevant information as possible. Hashmal was aware of the seriousness of the situation. If the strange demon's words were true, then this wasn't a simple task. It was unpleasant to be captured by a demon, but she wasn't treated like a hostage. A strange demon. He was called Randolph Brigzeal. He gave her freedom. At the very least, she could roam freely inside the dungeon. She didn't know if he was stupid, arrogant, or had other intentions. Hashmal actively explored inside the dungeon. The dungeon looks like it has an ecosystem. She worked up from the bottom of the dungeon. The low-grade creatures, an ecosystem was created for them. It was amazing. The creatures with a predator relationship was figured out. The numbers were maintained at a constant level and the life cycle was very fast. There were even creatures that formed villages. She found a settlement near a lake where orcs could be seen moving back and forth. The orc shamans served their gods and knew how to use advanced tools. Due to the nature of the dungeon, the various species knew how to use objects. They gathered things on their own to make improvements. Adults hunted while children learned their skills. The mothers remaining in the village to take care of their offspring while the priests made important decisions. It wasn't just the orcs. Even the mindless species showed differences in their actions. An amazing scene. But this is a dungeon. The center of darkness. Of course, seeing civilization being created in a place like this was remarkable. The dungeon was still a place filled with the powerful forces of darkness. The creatures were brought here by various black magic and would be lost to instinct. It is impossible to think of something constructive. But this dungeon was different. There was a similar unpleasant magic power, but it didn't have a significant impact on the creatures. Rather, it seemed to be having a good impact on the development of the creatures. Appropriate environment, rich food, balanced food chain between the creatures, a harmony was established. She wondered if this could really be defined as a dungeon. It was more like an ecosystem. Hashmal was confused. A community of dwarves, fierce creatures guarding intermediate areas. Even if what I'm seeing is a lie, they will become stronger over time. This was the first time she had seen such an active dungeon. Usually many dungeons were lacking. They didn't consider the conditions for making life in the first place. The beasts would fight hard to maintain their lives. That wasn't the case here. A driving force existed behind their growth. This would pile up over time into a power that couldn't be ignored. The demon Randolph really formed an ecosystem like this? A decent effort is required for harmony. It is hard for an existence like a demon. It was strange no matter how she thought about it. She didn't know if it was designed this way from the beginning, but it hasn't been a long time since the dungeon was formed. There were signs of a steady management. Tremendous interest. It took all types of effort. However, the demons weren't a species famous for being attentive. Just like his words, he truly wasn't a normal demon. A strong aura can be felt as I near the top. One if the dungeon core and one. Hashmal moved. She didn't miss anything around her as she climbed up the dungeon. Finally, she reached the 15th floor and witnessed an amazing sight. Tree of Origin? She was astonished. There was a tree of origin in heaven. It was called the first and last tree, and no one could manage it except for the heavenly king. This one was smaller and weaker, but the energy made it apparent that this was the tree of origin. A grave was in the vicinity of the tree. There was the appearance of dug-up soil and a wooden signpost saying, Angel Nim. Someone suddenly blocked her path. Stop. My dungeon master has given my jurisdiction over the tree of origin. I will not allow access to the tree of origin. A female dark elf, Chrisley. Hashmal asked with trembling hands. Who buried the angel over there? The fairy of the dungeon core buried him. Ah, can I see the fairy? Right now she isn't here. I will pass on a message. Chrisley was puzzled, and Hashmal was strangely excited. All angels hope to be buried under the tree of origin. There might be a hostile relationship, but I would like to convey my gratitude. It was like that? Chrisley was convinced by her words. The grave would be a source of nutrients for the tree of origin. Chrisley had been worried about what to do with the bodies of the angels, but Hashmal gave her the solution. I will tell her, and I will bury the rest of the angels here. Is it okay? It isn't something difficult. Chrisley's stiff expression loosened and she smiled. Chrisley knew what the dungeon master wanted from Hashmal. She could score some nutrients and points with Hashmal, so it was killing two birds with one stone. Thank you. Hashmal gave a large sigh of relief. Hashmal wasn't casual about all the angels under her being killed. That gratitude should be directed to my dungeon master. Let me think about it. Her perception about demons wasn't easily broken. But just saying she would think about it was coming a long way. She stared at the tree of origin for a long time. I don't see the spirit of the origin. Was it still not mature? She only knew about the tree of origin from the heavenly king. After snapping out of it, Hashmal explored the rest of the dungeon. There were empty floors, but she once again stared with surprise at the high-class griffin and gigantes. Unfortunately, she wasn't allowed near the dungeon core. This is not the only dungeon. Hashmal wished to leave the dungeon. She wanted to look at everything from a wider perspective. She didn't expect anything, but the demon Randolph surprisingly allowed her out of the dungeon. Krasla was the catch, but she didn't mind. And a week passed on Earth. She rode the Pyrox and was covered by a stealth item, so their speed was quite fast. Rather, it was a lot of time. She recklessly entered the other dungeons. She might have lost her holy power, but the other dungeons were in a terrible state. None of them had a proper ecosystem like Randolph's dungeon. The demons didn't care about the species, and it was impossible for breeding to work properly in the poor environment. Only the deformed and strong creatures survived. She was also able to witness demons and creatures attacking humans. A very strong presence. It was estimated that she discovered one of the Grand Dukes. This planet will be destroyed. Her mouth was dry. Randolph's words weren't false. This was indeed an arena for a competition. The will to destroy could be felt. I am alone. I lost my wings. Without being taken care of in heaven, my holy power won't be restored. Her fists squeezed together. Did she just have to wait and watch the destruction? She couldn't communicate with heaven, and there was no telling when the dimensional gate would open again. Perhaps, there was a possibility that the dimensional gate would never appear again. Someone had intervened and changed the code of the dimensional gate. Never be corrupted by darkness. Your role is to cleanse the darkness and conceive the light. Hashmal recalled the words she heard when she broke out of her egg. Heavenly King. She could never forget that warm voice and the information. Please forgive my sins. But her mission was to purify the darkness and bring light to this dimension. The only way to regain strength was to contaminate the outside. If she could delay the destruction of the world until support from heaven arrived, then it would be a success. I am walking alone, a hunter that will catch all the demons. Hashmal made a decision after 1 week. She would use him. Corrupting an angel was simple. The angels had to deny themselves and immerse themselves in the darkness. For example, breaking certain angel rules. It is as I thought. I looked firmly as Hashmal in front of me. Hashmal was slowly moving in front of me. I seriously considered what was happening in front of me. She recognized I was different from other demons. It was obvious she planned to keep the demons in check. In the future, my name will be Tashmal. You will discard the name you were given as an angel? That's right. Hashmal had already made up her mind. She was changing, so her attitude needed to be different or else she would suffer. Anyway, one problem was solved. An angel that denied themselves would become lethargic. Discipline is the easiest way to break this situation. And the strongest sin, mixing with demons, they would experience heavy punishment. Personally, I had a lot of hope. Soon Hashmal would entirely belong to me. Under the dungeon system, she would be ruled by me. Hashmal didn't know it, but she wouldn't be able to harm me. She would be forced to follow any orders I gave. Hashmal, you have picked the best and worst hand, I said with a thin smile. Take it off. Impossible achievement. The first angel has been corrupted. 2,500,000 PT will be paid. Impossible achievement. The Dominion's angel, Hashmal, will come under the jurisdiction of the demon, Randolph Briggseel. 3 million PT will be paid. Your achievement score has surpassed 10,000 points. Second grade Easter egg has opened. The achievement store has opened. From now on, you can buy all types of precious things not available in the store of all things with achievement points. In addition, accomplishing certain achievements will add related species or goods to the store. Message windows continuously rose. My eyes rested on Hashmal. No, Tashmal. Tashmal was collapsed on a bed. Sweat was flowing down her white skin. She was covered with marks from our joining, but my attention was grabbed by the black wings on her back. Tashmal had fainted from the process. It was the first time she felt such an intense shock. But the black wings were gradually increasing in size even when she was asleep. Instead of holy power, it was filled with yin magic power. It was the first time I had seen a fallen angel being created. No one had ever seen it. There were some questions. I quietly opened mind's eye. Name: Tashmal. Occupation: fallen angel. Title: * angel of light steeped in darkness. Epic: intelligence and magic power +6. Stats: strength 68, intelligence 87, +6. Agility 78, stamina 69. Magic power 84, +6. Potential: 386 + 12, 471. Uniqueness: an angel that spread light into the world has now become a fallen angel. The stats have been lowered in the aftermath of losing her wings, but they will quickly recover. Skill: propagation of darkness. Epic: barrage of dark spears. Epic: dark thunder. Epic. Indeed, the title and skill names had changed. I was glad the ratings were intact. The stats seemed somewhat low, but it wasn't a big problem. Right now she was comparable to the Griffin and Gigantes. She still had 3 epic grade skills that could be utilized. In the past, she was at a higher level, but that would quickly recover. I was reassured after seeing the specifications. Good, I nodded. 5.5 million points and even a fallen angel. That alone would be called a sufficient gain. Combined with the points earned from hunting angels, I had gained more than 6 million points from this event. Thanks to that, my points already went over 10 million. Considering that it hadn't even been half a year, I had high expectations for the next Demon World auction. But, achievements store? After checking Hashmal's status, I turned my eyes back to the message windows in the air. Class 2 Easter egg. My eyes stared at the words achievements store. It relies on achievement points. Something that I obtained every time I got an achievement. It could also be used in this way. In order to do so, I needed to know if 10,000 was high or low. I never experienced this in my previous life. Just after I returned back in time, I obtained the Class 3 Easter egg, Heart of the Hell Monarch. This time it was a Class 2 egg. I naturally smiled imagining it. There was a list of things that could be purchased from the store of all things. All types of precious things could be noted. The store of all things sold many items, but the efficiency wasn't very good. For example, there were low-grade creatures or skill books with bad options. A unique class skill book would require more than 1 million points, so many couldn't afford to purchase it. They would rather save the points for the Demon World auction. Now there was the achievements store. If the efficiency wasn't good, then I would be disappointed. I wouldn't purchase any items that were only useful for mopping up the floor. It will take her some time to wake up. I glanced at Tashmal collapsed on the bed. There were no signs that she would move soon. I grabbed my clothes strewn on the ground and headed for the top floor of the dungeon. Yi was next to the dungeon core. She was sighing. Ahiyu. The angel was no help. All he did was make Yi bury him. An angel appeared, so she thought her wish had been granted. Instead, he only muttered strange words and died. Her heart ached. Oh, I am having withdrawal symptoms from not seeing my bees. Yi's delight is gone. I will fall ill from these withdrawal symptoms. Yi leaned back and rubbed her cheeks against the dungeon core. In fact, Yi thought of the bees as a favorite toy. She always took great care of them. Yi's limit was revealed. It had been 10 days and her hands were shaking like an addict. Yi, I yearn for the bees. Yi will draw them. Yi jumped up from her position. Her usual jewel-like eyes had been replaced with those like a murderer's. Yi lowered her body and started to draw bees on the ground. Now the honey. Yi, but the picture. It wasn't drawn very well. They didn't move. Why aren't you moving? Listen to Yi's words. I drew you, so why aren't you moving? Why, Yi-hing? Stop playing around. Sasasik. Yi quickly deleted the picture of the bees and laughed awkwardly. You came, master? She transformed into a poised state. I cleared up my expression and said, that was quite funny. Any more? Ah, it's nothing. Master. Yi is faithfully obeying master's punishment. Yi doesn't know anything about bees. What is that? Yi shook her head like a dog. She sucked her fingers innocently. I heard you made a grave near the Tree of Origin. That's, Yi thought the Tree of Origin Nim sent me the angel in response to my wish. But then he was defective, so Yi buried him. Wish? Sent her? I was puzzled by her words but accepted them. I had experience with trying to understand Yi's words. I decided to compromise since it would benefit both of us. Very good. Huh? I solved something easily thanks to that. The angel buried at the Tree of Origin. Hashmal's heart was swayed due to that. She even said, thank you. Besides, an angel's body was also beneficial to the Tree of Origin. Yi didn't know about the angels and buried one near the Tree of Origin. Help from a completely unexpected place. She had been deprived of rights and exiled, but she deserved some compensation for her contribution. Yi. If master is good, then Yi is good. Yi didn't know what she was saying and laughed. Her wings restlessly flapped and rubbed her cheeks with both hands. I looked at her and spoke. Your permissions are restored. I will also turn a blind eye to your garden. Yi instantly stopped all her actions. Yi's ears must have gone bad. No, you heard it properly. Yi's eyes widened to a frightening extent after she heard my words. Then master. Now Yi can annoy the bees? You can freely act as you like. I can even walk with the king bees? As long as it doesn't affect the ecosystem. Can Yi design buildings? That's not possible. Yi lay on the floor and stretched out her hands and feet. She slapped her cheeks until they were red. That is enough. Indifference. I had deprived her of all rights and even refused her hobby. That was like rat poison to a fairy. In particular, Yi's nature meant she wouldn't hold out much longer. But I hoped she realized something. If the same mistakes were repeated over and over again, then Yi would have no choice but to rule harshly. Rather than Yi, I would drop a stronger punishment on the bees. The worker bees would be heavily punished. I decided to wait for the excited Yi to calm down. I didn't expect she would be rolling around for 3 hours. 3 hours later, I ignored Yi behind me and used the dungeon core to open the achievements store. Welcome to the achievements store. Current achievement points 11,451. Achievement points can be used to purchase goods from the store. Item names marked with a plus can only be purchased once. The window that popped up didn't differ significantly from the store of all things. Only the names had changed. But the content was completely different. My eyes moved down the lists. Equipment list. Wild Bow, U, 1000. Shadow Award, U, 1000. Quick Shoes, XU, 2000. Plus Death Robe, XU, Set, 2000. Prominent Armor, XU, 2000. Plus Atasha's Sword, Epic, 3000. Plus Contigonam's Helmet, Epic, Set, 3000. Creatures List, Pyrock 300. Superior Goblin 1000. Pure Blood Naga 2000. Homunculus 4500. Plus Cruel Commander and Core 6000. Plus Great Orc, Ram, 10,000. Plus Vampire from the Jin Clan, Subira, 15,000. Plus Lich King, Gospel, 20,000. Plus True Demonic Dragon, Aogen 50,000. Skills List, plus Earthquake, U, 1,500. Plus Sacred Dust, U, 2000. Plus Divine Sword Unity, XU, Passive, 2000. Plus Dark Sword, XU, 2,500. Plus Forest Shield, XU, 3000. Plus Dark Meteor, Epic, 10,000. Plus Thousand Territory, Epic, 15,000. Additional achievement-related items, Angel Egg 500. I could judge the list with one glance. It wasn't a list of general items. The items that came up was enough to scare me. The first equipment list, the default was unique items and it went up the way up to epic. Besides, the Death Robe was a set item with the Death Wand that Chrisley had. Contigonam was king of the Yetis. Even his helmet was legendary. Atasha's sword was something I saw when the Class 3 Easter egg opened. It had appeared again on this list. But the thing that really surprised me was the creatures list. Creatures that couldn't be bought in the store of all things. The Pyrox were very difficult to grow. There were also several things that could never be seen at the Demon World auction. But I focused on the bottom where the creatures had names. Great Orc Ram, Vampire from the Jin Clan Subira, Lich King Gospel, True Demonic Dragon Aogen. Legendary, mythical creatures, names renowned a long time ago. No one could oppose them in those times. They had already died but they were included in the list. This had to mean something. It is really ridiculous. That's right, bringing back the dead. If some part of their bodies were salvaged then they could be revived. The Mado era, a time when the dragon species was in full bloom. In that time, the demons couldn't carelessly enter the middle world. Many things happened and there were numerous geniuses killed in this time. Their records were left behind in the demon world. Great Orc Ram, a golden orc who managed to conquer half of the continent. His reigning period was short but he faced thousands of knights alone. A strong creature that would enter the top ranks of the high-class creatures. Subira from the Jin Vampire Clan, a creature active in the middle world that created a kingdom of infected people. It required the Golden Knights who were guardians of the Virgin to stop him. There was a great battle in the demon world that everyone knew about. The demon world didn't care about the presence of the middle world. I only heard the stories. I didn't fight all day long on the battlefield. Whenever there was a lull, I would linger near demons telling stories. Most of them spoke about fanciful things but they frequently mentioned Subira. Lich King Gospel and True Demonic Dragon Aogen were also active in the demon world. Both were treated as existences equal to the devil. Among them, Aogen was regarded as an insurmountable wall. A dragon was a high-class 4 LV creature, a Balrog a high-class 5 LV creature and a True Demonic Dragon was the only 6 LV high-class creature. There was no stopping Aogen if he appeared on Earth. The Grand Dukes who hadn't recovered their power yet would have no chance. My victory would be confirmed, but I needed 50,000 achievement points. That required quite a lot of achievements. I had dozens more achievements than I did in my previous life. Yet I only gathered a little over 10,000 points. 50,000 still far away. I need to collect more achievement points. But I didn't think it was impossible. Now it was the 3rd year. 3 years had passed. I had already gathered 10,000. It was likely I would find many more achievements. One day, I might be able to collect more than 50,000 achievement points. Right now it was just like a pie in the sky. Next, I looked at the skills list. There are a few here. Just like the equipment, the minimum rating was unique. Furthermore, there were epic rated skills that the store of all things didn't sell. Dark Meteor, Thousand Territory, etc. were all names I had heard of before. But Dark Sword and Forest Shield were new. Grand Duke Ariel used Abyss Sword. Is this an earlier skill compatible with it? I carefully read the description of the skill. Name: Dark Sword, XU. Description: a technology that can be used to see into the depths of the real abyss. The sword will use the abyss to cause a cut in space. In addition, Dark Sword will absorb all light. Asterisk wounds caused by Dark Sword are impossible to heal. There will be a strong backlash if it faces holy power. I nodded. Ariel's Abyss Sword was a skill that caused chaos. The information was also similar. Dark Sword had an XU rating, so I wondered about the rating of Abyss Sword. Lightning God alone is insufficient. I touched my jaw. Dark Sword might be one step lower than Abyss Sword, but it was more appropriate for me to use. I only had Lightning God, and Wrath wasn't a skill that I could 100% take advantage of. It would be enormous if I could use the synergy between Dark Sword and Wrath. Divine Sword Unity. My eyes turned to that skill. I slowly read the description. Name: Divine Sword Unity, XU, passive. Description: the sword and body will breathe and act together. It is possible to master all things involving the sword, including the killing sword or the living sword. Asterisk strength and agility will rise by 3 when using the sword. Asterisk you can surrender to a sword with a strong ego. I had a thought after reading the description. Greed. I wanted Dark Sword and Divine Sword Unity. The remaining skills were too expensive or didn't fit my taste. Next I saw the additional achievement-related items list. Angel Egg. I had gained some impossible angel-related achievements as well as an angel after corrupting an angel. The item was probably due to this. However, the name wasn't unusual. Angels were born from eggs. After laying the eggs, they were covered with angel wings for a certain period of time before the eggs break. The problem was that there were no angels to do that. I don't know if the wings of a fallen angel will be effective. I needed to speak with Tashmal. It was unknown if normal angels could be born after being covered by a fallen angel's wings. Instead of holy power, Tashmal's wings were filled with yin magic power. There was the possibility of premature births of the fetus dying. I have to try an experiment. However, expectations were overflowing from my eyes. I was satisfied with Tashmal, but it was a completely different story if I could train a large number of angels. A demon with angels in my dungeon. Plus, the Tree of Origin could use the corpses of angels as nutrients. There was probably a connection between the two. I also might be able to achieve multiple achievements if I trained the angels. I was filled with anticipation. Perhaps achievement points were even more urgently needed than general points. I need to put off the purchase. I had 11,451 achievement points. I had to use it as carefully as possible. I bought 1 egg and waited for Tashmal. Tashmal slept for half a day before waking up. She changed into a white dress that contrasted with the black wings. The wings were the mark of a fallen angel and was already fully grown. Plus, the number of wings were identical to what she originally had. 6. That number represented a Dominion's angel, but now it just showed the dignity of a fallen angel. This egg, she immediately noticed the angel egg. Can you bear it? Where the hell did you get this? It is forbidden to bring an angel's egg out of heaven. Only advanced rank angels are given permission to enter. Her voice trembled. She was very upset. She didn't know how I had obtained an angel egg, but she had failed to properly understand the dungeon system. Some angels give birth to eggs. After they are born, the emotions of the child will be evaluated to determine the hierarchy. But, a fallen angel is not allowed to exist in heaven. Where did you take this from? A little animosity, but it didn't lead to anything more than that. I gazed at her and said, "Don't worry, I didn't steal it. And I really hate to say something twice. Tashmal, can you bear it?" "I can't bear it. A fallen angel can't give birth to a divine one." I clicked my tongue. "It is unfortunate, dying before even being born. Without being born, there is no choice. If you neglect it, then it won't get any power. There is no choice but for it to die. The angel egg required warmth. Without it, there would be no fetal movement. Neglecting the egg a few days would cause it to die. There would be a difference between an angel or creature taking care of it." Tashmal's expression became subtly determined. I gave a small laugh. "Don't worry, it isn't your fault that you fell. It is just bad luck. Let's give it a try. If you are lucky, then a child might be born. I won't allow a holy angel egg be carried by a creature." Tashmal exclaimed and took the angel egg from my hand. "I will bear it. I'll take over for this child. Is it okay? Even if I was corrupted, I was once an angel of light. It is okay if I try. This is a full-time work." I shrugged. "Maybe I will add a few more angel eggs." "Then please do so. Don't tell me you have angels locked up." "Then Tashmal, can I really entrust the eggs to you? Eggs wouldn't be born even if angels were forced to copulate together. I heard that some were forced to do such things. Many demons tried to do that with the angels they caught." Tashmal's worries were groundless. I quietly opened my magic power and offered advice. "Tashmal, you are no longer an angel. Keep this in mind." A complex expression formed on Tashmal's face before she closed her mouth. The dungeon's nature had a profound impact on the growth of the creatures. I got it in an already overgrown state, but the angel egg hatched exactly 1 week after I gave it to Tashmal. To my surprise, the angel was born safely. 2 adorable wings made its appearance into the world. At the same time, an expected achievement emerged. A remarkable achievement, the first angel egg to be hatched in a dungeon. 500,000 PT will be given. 1,000 achievement points will be added. Now it seemed like the achievement points will come up with the general points. Anyway, it was an ordinary angel but very compliant. The potential could be compared to an intermediate 5 LV creature. I increased the number once I was sure they could hatch properly. I bought an additional 10 angel eggs. Once they grew, it would be possible to breed them together and multiple the numbers for another achievement. I used the rest of the points on Dark Sword and Divine Sword Unity. The remaining achievement points was 2,451. I confirmed my status window after learning the skills. Name: Randolph Brigzeal. Occupation: Demon Earl. Dungeon Master. Title: Dungeon Hunter. Residual stats +1 when occupying dungeons and hunting demons. Indomitable Warrior. XU. All stats +2. Origin Master. Epic. All stats +3. First to receive a fairy's blessing. Magic power +6. Stats: Strength 80, +15, Intelligence 72, +5. Agility 75, +15, Stamina 80, +5. Magic power 85, +11. Potential: 392 +51 500ths. Remaining stat points: 4. Electric power, 21 gigawatts. Uniqueness: Heart of the Hell Monarch has woken up. Skill: Combine Everything, Mind's Eye, XU, Dark Sword, XU, Divine Sword Unity, XU, Passive, Lightning Elemental, Epic, Wrath, Epic, Sloth, Epic. I had an extra stat point from hunting Saman, combined with the +3 strength and agility from Divine Sword Unity, and there was also the electric power from the nuclear power plant. There were only a few changes, but I was pleased with the status window. Death Robe isn't bad. I was pursuing the 7 sins, but they weren't on the list. It wasn't bad to buy Death Robe for a set effect with Death Wand, since it would strengthen Chrysley's power. Death Wand has the undead manufacturing skill. The set would help with creating things like the Spardwa. My achievement points were almost empty after purchasing the Death Robe. Now, I used my achievement points, but I still had many general points left. A huge 12 million points. There was still a lot of time until the next Demon World auction. It would be foolish to leave it unused. I should accomplish all the expected achievements. I nodded. Meanwhile, Krasla was riding on the griffin in the sky with multiple shades. Master gave me a command. I must follow through. Krasla originally grew up as Chrisley's guardian. He received a thorough training to help Chrisley. He acted as an older brother, but she was more important than his own life. But Chrisley got a disease. She weakened every day and all types of precious medicine couldn't save her. They decided to devote their souls if it would cure Chrisley, and then the dark spirits came. There was the slightest hope that an elixir could be obtained. They were sent to the auction, then purchased by an unusual demon called Randolph Brigzeal. Master is different from ordinary demons. Krasla was nervous at first. Demons were a selfish and exclusive species. It was unlikely they would offer an elixir. In particular, he was convinced it was the end once Chrisley's identity was discovered. After Chrisley's identity was discovered, he hoped to show off his skills and get an elixir as a reward. Incredibly, the demon examined them just once and figured it out. The fact that they were hiding something. He felt despair when he failed, and the punishment was supposed to be death. But his estimate was off the mark. The dark elves were made to act like dogs. There was no reason for it. He was skeptical, but the demon had promised to heal Chrisley. But at that moment, Krasla just thought it was a relief that he was alive. Yet the demon really fulfilled his promise to give an elixir. He also participated in a ceremony with Chrisley. A ceremony between a dark elf and demon. It was such an unprecedented situation that even Elder Julium was dumbfounded. Of course, there was a chance Chrisley would reject. However, she wisely accepted the ceremony. Thanks to that, Chrisley's illness was healed and she took the spot of highest-ranking dark elf. Confidence in the dungeon master grew, and the dwarves also weren't mistreated. Furthermore, the dungeon master didn't hesitate to give rewards for contribution. There were a few guaranteed basic freedoms. The names, Roy and Rose, were even given to newly born twins, showing off an intimacy. They weren't seen as slaves, and Krasla inwardly swore to follow the dungeon master for the rest of his life. Now there was also the tree of origin. Although our species are different, he is someone that I, Krasla, can believe in. By default, Krasla had a knight's temperament. He had defended Chrisley and ensured her safety. He also instinctively knew that he needed to protect the dungeon. If other demons invaded, he would die first before allowing the other dark elves to be touched. Everyone scatter. Saman's dungeon is definitely somewhere in China. Find it as quickly as possible. Krasla stretched out his hand while riding the griffin, and the shades spread out. It looks good, I thought while busy with changing the terrain of the dungeon in domestic mode. Krasla, the griffin, and a number of shades were scouting China. They were looking for the location of Saman's dungeon. Somewhere in China? I knew where the dukes and grand dukes were located. However, the earls such as Saman hadn't interested me. I just knew he was somewhere in China. When looking at the memories of my previous life, Saman had always appeared from the direction of China. Once the event triggered, Saman arrived quickly, and I could infer that he came from a place close by. Krasla needed to find Saman's dungeon before the other demons learned of his death. Terrain changes. The 26th floor should be a combined zone. The 20th floor a sea terrain, 21st zone a thunder zone, 22nd floor a hurricane zone, 23rd floor a blizzard zone, 24th floor a death zone, and the 25th floor was a sacred zone. Finally, the 26th floor combined thunder, hurricanes and blizzards, causing a message window to pop up. Huge accomplishment. The terrain of more than 10 floors in a dungeon has been changed for the first time. 800,000 PT will be given. 1,545 achievement points will be given. I had spent approximately 2 million points doing this. I was able to specify a separate death zone and sacred zone. Quite a lot of terrain had been changed. It was unexpected that I could add zones where undead and holy angels could grow normally. It wasn't just the terrain but the magic power itself that changed. In addition, the holy power didn't displace the magic power. A small amount of it was applied on the 25th floor. No, maybe magic power and holy power gained their energy from the same source. It was likely why 4 altars could be created. Either way, the angels could use the holy power to grow bigger. 1,545 points. It wasn't a bad result. Originally, achievements were important. It was the only way to obtain a large amount of points or a title. But now the achievements store highlights its importance even more. I need to add a few breeding species to the terrain. It would be a waste to only change the terrain. Filling it with species affected by the terrain would give a lot of benefits. Increasing the reproductive rate of the creatures at an early stage would give an advantage. It was better to do it when I had so much points. I don't know when the invasion from heaven will resume. It was impossible to tell when the dimensional gate would open. If I lacked creatures, then I could lose my dungeon this time as well. They would be the key at critical moments. The 20th floor has a sea terrain, so there should be sirens. I'd love to add the krakens, but too many points would be poured into multiplying their numbers. Sirens were intermediate 3 LV creatures. One cost 5,800 PT, so buying 30 for breeding purposes was possible. On the other hand, the kraken was an advanced 4 LV creature that cost 400,000 points. At least 12 million points would be required if I wanted a properly breeding cycle. Thunder bats on the 21st floor. Thunder's bats were an intermediate 4 LV creature and one step higher than the sirens. An unusual bat that ate lightning and could use the powerful lightning breath. 22nd floor's wind zone. Wind riders would be enough. A small, intermediate 4 LV creature. Only the skulls were the size of adults. But they were close to invincible in storms. The 23rd floor. It was a blizzard zone, so this was a place for the Yetis. Their speed was comparable to a saber tiger in the snow. And the 24th floor, the Death Mother, was added to the death zone. 2 meters in size with a plump build. A strong poison was emitted from the body. In addition, Death Mother was an ant queen. She constantly generated virulent larvae over 50 centimeters. There was no need to add anything to the 25th floor. This place was for Tashmal and the angels. The combined 26th floor was left alone. I couldn't think of an appropriate creature just yet. After adding creatures to the floor below, an achievement window popped up. Incredible achievement. 10 appropriate breeding species have been added to transform zones for the first time. 1 million PT will be paid. 1,833 achievements will be given. Thanks to the achievements from the additional terrain and species, I actually ended up using slightly over 2 million points. There still remained 10 million points. This is just South Korea's dungeon. My gaze turned. It was time to go to Japan's dungeon. Significant achievement. 100 unique goblins have emerged for the first time. 200,000 PT will be paid. 400 achievement points will be given. I received an achievement as soon as I visited Japan's dungeon. I need to personally visit the other dungeons to receive the achievements. I nodded. That's why I had no news about what was happening in Japan's dungeon. The waiting message windows finally appeared after I moved there. There was a significantly high frequency of unique goblins appearing. So I only received a small amount of points. It was still better than nothing. I'm glad to see Master. Guyo flapped his wings and welcomed me. The progress has been good? I handed over permissions for Guyo to directly use the points. However, the points were hardly reduced. Gaia's expression darkened. There is too much to do and I couldn't choose. What about making most of the floors into a maze? It is okay, but the costs in points is very expensive. Guyo had created the maze on the first floor himself. It was easier to hide treasures and traps. It was okay to push the maze concept. The awakened in Japan would be able to feel excitement from such things. Recently the points from Japan had increased, so it wouldn't be bad to expand the maze. There is no additional maze terrain. I will create my own. It isn't even related to achievements. These calculations were also included. Don't mind it. How many floors have been pierced through? 3rd floor. That is fairly low. Just like in Korea, each floor was significantly different. It was circumstantial evidence that South Korea had the fastest growing awakened. Create a maze up to the 5th floor. I will leave it to you. Guyo can act freely? Yes. Wow. A round of applause. Unlike Yi's hobby with bees, Guyo seemed to like being productive. I was just glad he didn't give me honey water. A number of different terrains and creatures should be added as well. The development of the dungeon for achievements had started. Welcome to the achievements store. Current achievement points 6,440. Achievement points can be used to purchase goods from the store. Item names marked with a plus can only be purchased once. The result meant points had poured in like crazy. I collected 6,000 achievement points in 2 weeks. I didn't mind that my points were halved. The rich get richer. That really fits. I realized that it was easy to use points to gain achievement points. In particular, achievements were applied separately for Japan's dungeon. Achievements without the title of first gave less points, but this was great information. This meant I could gain more achievement points if I had more dungeons. Although there was still a long way to go, 50,000 achievement points really wasn't a dream. But for now, I had no thoughts of saving the achievement points. I looked through the list and selected an item. At the same time, a message window rose. Are you sure you want to buy the Cruel Commander and Core? Chapter 94 to 97 Cruel Commander's Core. An expensive creature that could only be bought once with 6,000 achievement points. He heard the name on the day he got the heart of the Hell Monarch. Core, Great Orc Ram. The Jin Vampire Subira was also different from a core. There was a numerical difference. But he didn't know what it meant by Cruel Commander. Even so, I was interested because it was a core. In the store of all things, there were no cases where a large number of creatures were sold at once. There also weren't any core sold at the Demon World auction. I had quite a few creatures, but it wasn't to the extent that it could be called a core. Of course, the lowest class creatures might be if they combined, but there wasn't anyone that could efficiently lead them. They wouldn't show the appearance of an army. If I have a strong core with multiple creatures, then my situation will become better. To be honest, there weren't many people who could properly command the number of creatures now. It was the same for me as well. So far, I had pushed for quantity over quality. But Chrysalie had bloomed thanks to this event. Over time, she would become the best as she gained experience. But in this situation, I was in need of a skilled commander. I wasn't the only one aiming for Earl Simon's dungeon. There were 12 other demons who saw the scene. By now, the news would have been transmitted to Upa's faction. The confused demons were waiting in front of my dungeon, so I needed to hit first. The dungeon master is gone, so the fairy will be anxious. The dungeon master and dungeon core were closely linked to the fairy. Guyo formed a new contract shortly after I killed Adol, but a fairy waiting a long time would feel extreme anxiety. In my previous life, the fairies would feel confusion and move the creatures outside. Usually they prevented anyone from entering, but it was hard to predict their move. I will buy it, I said heavily. 6,000 achievement points. I used all sorts of methods and 6 million points to save this amount. I had collected it recklessly. I could still gain more points from my dungeons. Soon a large number of message windows appeared in the air. You have bought the Cruel Commander's Core. 6,000 achievement points will be deducted. During the Mado era, the Shadow Emperor was a very greedy person. He buried all the treasures of the world in a deep place and chose a cruel commander and his core to protect it. It was impossible to take out any of the treasures. The flesh decayed and bones became rotten, but they still only had one loyalty. Despite their dead bodies, the souls will continue obeying the commands of the Shadow Emperor. The Cruel Commander's corpse is made up of a massive army of 50,000 troops. The creatures are powerful enough to tear down a thick tree with their hands. The Cruel Commander's corpse is moving through the dimensional gate. Generating a random area has been completed. An event message is sent to all demons and awakened. Be careful, the Cruel Commander considers all living creatures as thieves. Even the buyer is no different. They will kill all thieves for 90 days before returning to their original place. Points obtained from killing humans, creatures or demons will be transferred to the buyer. Destruction contribution will also rise. Talk. I frowned. Crazy. This was unexpected. At that moment, all awakened and demons on Earth received a message. The Cruel Commander's corpse has arrived in a random place. They will devour everything around them. Stop them. Just 3 lines. The awakened were confused by the message window that suddenly emerged. Cruel Commander's core? What is that? They should be. Right now the world was in a state of extreme confusion due to the angels and creatures. The angels had almost all been exterminated. The emergence of another event wasn't welcomed at all. There were 2 problems. The Cruel Commander's core didn't make sense at all. But this worry was solved surprisingly quickly. This is the central district in the northeast Jilin province of China. Right now tens of thousands of skeleton soldiers are marching here. Quickly crossing to the south, damage. Cheek. The brief news only lasted 10 seconds. There were subtitles, but the viewers were more focused on the video. A huge fireball had hit the helicopter. The scene that transitioned to an announcer. The video above was sent from China. China has taken some measures and their military will be taking action in the next 2 days. But the reactions of the neighboring countries are skeptical. The situation between the angels and creatures couldn't even be resolved properly. The announcer then said with a determined expression, "The situation is no different from Korea. There are still a large number of creatures hanging near the dungeon." The damage was lessened due to the swift response from guilds such as Heaven's Will and Mithril, but citizens are still cautioned to be careful. In particular, all citizens around Seoul should evacuate to the designated shelter. Then, God bless all the people of South Korea. For the Emperor, the cruel commander, a tall man wearing a faded golden helmet and armor was shouting while riding a skeletal horse. He arrogantly lifted a high hand towards the skeleton soldiers. Kung, kung, kung. They beat the shields held at their chests. The sound was repeated in accordance with a certain rhythm and caused a strong pressure. Tens of thousands of creatures repeating the sound was sure to cause fear. But that wasn't all. A wave that naturally spread death. They caused devastation everywhere they walked. Grass and flowers died as the land became barren. They were as good as unbeatable as everything on the ground died. Those looking at the cruel commander's corps were tense and nervous. There were a number of soldiers and awakened near them, but the numbers were small. In addition, all of them were frightened. Yeeing, hundreds of skeletons holding sticks wielded a large barrier that covered the place. The barrier was to prevent people from escaping the death zone as well as block powerful attacks from the outside. However, it had no effect on the attacks of the corps. The skeleton archers could fire arrows at the humans outside the barrier. It was covered with intense magic power and could pierce through special alloys. The humans inside the barrier were like cornered rats. The expressions of the humans were all the same. Tension, fear, their hearts were jumping like crazy. The living, cruel commander raised a sword ornamented with gold. For the Emperor, Waruru, the commander ventured forward on horseback. Tens of thousands of skeletons could a thunderous sound as they followed. My brows furrowed. I didn't think it would appear this way. Unexpected. I had no choice. I didn't know it would be revealed in an event format after purchasing it from the store. A friendly system would have given a brief explanation before purchase. Of course, I got some information. But it was a strange contract as there was a limit of 90 days where they were sweep the earth. I wondered if it would be the same I summoned the orc or Aeogen. I didn't know if it was good or bad news, but the list had changed after purchasing the cruel commander's core. Plus predatory Hamid's core 8,500. One more had appeared. Maybe another core would appear on the list if I hired the predatory Hamid core. The reason behind the core. It was simple. For the invasion of the earth. A means of rapidly destroying the earth for other demons. If I knew, then I would have bought it more carefully. It is lucky that they appeared in China. The cruel commander's core were summoned to China. The stir in China would cause the demons to let down their guard. They wouldn't carelessly mess with the troops. That alone would be a great help when occupying Earl Simon's dungeon. So far, the demons and creatures in front of my dungeon had yet to withdraw. The problem was, your contribution to the destruction of the earth has risen steeply. The battle has ended. 831 point has been acquired. The battle has ended. 981 point has been acquired. The battle has ended. 4,376 point has been acquired. The constantly rising notifications. It was cleared from my sight, but I couldn't help focusing on one phrase. Contributing to the destruction of the earth. There were riots as soon as the cruel commander appeared. Everything around him perished, including humans and awakened. From his perspective, everyone was a thief. But at the same time, my contribution soared. I didn't care how many humans died. I also didn't care about the awakened in foreign countries. I also killed numerous humans. But I wanted to avoid the destruction of the earth. This was what the gods wanted in exchange for sending me back in time. They wouldn't block my road as long as humanity wasn't destroyed. So that I wouldn't ignore that promise, they left behind some gifts. I would get a high-class creature with every dungeon I obtained. It was a big power. But they were essentially on the side of the gods. There were other creatures as well. I already obtained the griffin and gigantes, so I didn't dare disobey my promise with the gods. I can't throw away my chances at a high-class creature. In retrospect, this gift was a type of bribe. Avoid the destruction of the earth. It would be meaningless if my contribution to the destruction soared. There was no reason for a bribe if the person didn't comply. I had certain constraints around me. Right now I need to worry about Samon's dungeon, and how to take advantage of the core. I had a headache at the thought of the coming days. I pulled out the crystal ball that had a connection with Krasla. I had to hurry. The cruel commander's body was decorated in gold. His eyes were hollow. Unlike other skeleton soldiers, he had a muscular body, but the blue color was reminiscent of the dead. He suddenly came into this world, but his task was clear. Destroy all thieves. To the cruel commander, this place was a den of thieves. He believed people brought him here to rob the treasure, so he needed to chop them up and return quickly. Already dozens of times, he killed the thieves, directly cutting their necks. Things like iron carriages and flying through the sky, he just saw them as magic items. There were many treasures in the world, so there must be thieves. The items were stolen from somewhere. The skeletons unfolded their barrier while the core cleaved into the enemies. The thieves were scattered all over, but he determined the method to quickly take care of them. The soldiers were split and performed their task of handling the thieves. This organization didn't take a long time. Help me, Shawahik. The sword went through the head of a living person. They also chased the fleeing remnants. At some point, the eyes of the cruel commander looked at the horizon. This, a huge and sinister structure. A dungeon that reached up into the sky. The cruel commander was looking at a certain spot. Soon he was able to realize the identity. A dark seed. This sinister magic power. His army had the attribute of darkness, but their loyalty was towards the emperor. They didn't care about the seed of darkness. He heard they tried to encroach on the territory of the emperor. He also heard they had a powerful force. Demon, kill. The eyes of the cruel commander flashed. Marquis Anastasia, a member of Grand Duke Pandemonium's faction that was still hanging around Korea's dungeon. There were a number of creatures remaining, as this was a chance to figure out the dungeon master. This dungeon has to be ruled by at least a duke or grand duke. I needed to figure out the owner of this dungeon for Pandemonium Nim. Knowing the location of a dungeon master gave considerable power. They could put pressure on using this event, and it could also be used strategically. It would be a useful key. And other demons had a similar idea to Anastasia. But Anastasia had a thought while monitoring the dungeon. Hoo-hoo, is it possible the dungeon master can't come out? A number of intermediate golems. A number of Spartwa, Lich and other intermediate creatures, a remarkable power. Who could it be? The person who gathered such creatures. There was a personal curiosity. Earning points from hunting awakened was limited. Breeding species and increasing the number of advanced creatures. The number of advanced creatures that could be bought with points was too low for breeding. In the beginning, she moved without any worries, but now she knew how important it was to control the balance between the two. The problem was still the points. These creatures were worth a considerable amount of points. Let alone the golems and lich. She estimated that close to 3 million points were consumed, and if the intermediate creatures were added, that would require 6 million. Collecting those types of points in a little over 2 years? There was only one person. That guy, Randolph Brigzeal, the one who brought a high-class creature to the auction and freely spent his points. She didn't know what magic he used, but he used millions of points. He didn't hesitate despite having no faction. Whether he was fearless or something else, the Grand Dukes were interested in him. To be honest, all four of them were different. They had different interests, but that guy was the exception. Using those type of points, there is no way he can build up the creatures at his dungeon. It would be a scam if he could gather creatures. They thought it was an impossible task. He was just lucky to gain some achievements that gave him millions of points, but there was a limit. So perhaps this was a different demon. At the very least, it wasn't a demon that belonged to her faction. So she was interested. Anastasia Nim, what time should we move? An advanced 4LV creature with the head and tongue of a snake and the lower body of a human. The Medusa said, "Are there any signs of those guys?" The demons were frustrated with this event and began to attack Korea's dungeon. But she already lost a lot of creatures and didn't move. She laughed. They were stupid. Heroes. And humans. The technology they used was quite remarkable. She would sit back and let the advanced creatures slaughter the humans. She lost some advanced creatures to the dungeon so she couldn't afford more damage. Thus she thought of this game. Humans had their own strength. But that has been limited to the last 2 years. The demons would gradually recover their power from the demon world. Right now it was hard for them to achieve mass destruction. But at the moment, she was convinced that the humans wouldn't dare resist. She gave them a grace recovery period first. The demons from the other factions wouldn't move easily. The destruction of humanity was coming closer. Although it wasn't now, most demons didn't know it. They had a contempt for humans and moved carelessly. Their taunts. No, Marquis Delit and his creatures haven't been visible since yesterday. The Medusa shook her head. Anastasia frowned at this. Come to think of it, Delit had been quiet since yesterday. Where to? Perhaps he returned to his dungeon? The other demons with him aren't visible at all. Running away? She couldn't help smiling at the thought. Delit belonged to Grand Duke Okuyo's faction and lost quite a lot of creatures in the struggle. In addition, she confirmed that Korea's dungeon didn't belong to Okuyo's faction. That's why they were here watching. But, leaving, it had to mean something. Did something urgent happen? Enough to make them leave? The series of events that happened recently meant her nerves. The cruel commander's corps has begun to attack your dungeon. The creatures in your dungeon will be rapidly swept away. Be careful. If the cruel commander and his men compromises the dungeon core, then the dungeon will lose its functionality. In addition, the authority of the dungeon master will disappear. Damn, that's right. This was it, an unexpected quest. There was no compensation and she only received a prompt saying someone was invading her dungeon. Delit ran off because his dungeon was hit. Then her mind was in a rush. There wasn't many troops remaining at the dungeon. She couldn't lose the dungeon. It was something that couldn't be moved. Anastasia hastily turned her body. Go back to the dungeon. As quickly as possible. I confirmed that most of the demons in front of my dungeon had disappeared. They have been stirred. 90 days. The contracted mercenaries didn't follow my orders, but they still did the basic things. Sweeping up the humans and dungeons. The demons noticed it as well and quickly returned to their dungeon. But I wasn't glad to see it. Now it had been 10 days. My contribution to the destruction already reached 0.01%. This meant that hundreds of thousands of humans had been killed. I couldn't let it rise by another 0.1%. I'd rather they sweep up the dungeons than the humans. Weakening the demons instead of humans would have more benefits for me. But I couldn't direct the cruel commander's movements. It was a major headache. Anyway, catching all the demons would be helpful to my goal. The optimal situation would be if the demons died fighting. My dungeon master. I've been contacted by the reconnaissance team. Chrisley walked forward and said, I had purchased 200 shades to look for Samon's dungeon. And now they had got in contact. The creatures in the dungeon are moving? Yes. They found a number of creatures moving around the dungeon. They were blocking anyone from entering the dungeon. And the majority of the creatures were in an extremely agitated state. I nodded. The fairy was anxious about losing the dungeon master and unleashed the creatures. It was to stop any invaders from the outside. This place? Please wait a moment. Chrisley cautiously took out a crystal ball. This is the place. The appearance of a dungeon appeared inside the crystal ball. Orcs could be seen around the dungeon. Here, I reviewed the creatures that I could see. There was a very high probability that it was Samon's dungeon. I turned and headed to the first floor. Prepare the creatures with quick mobility. We will go immediately. 200 saber tigers, Spartwa and Lich, and the griffin. The preparations were complete. It was sufficient to take over a dungeon, especially if I joined forces with the others. In addition, I needed to occupy the dungeon the cruel commander was facing. I have to try it. Tisk tisk. I clicked my tongue after solidifying my impression of him. The cruel commander. I bought it for 6,000 achievement points, but my expectations were betrayed. It had been a long time since I felt like this. I wouldn't be able to get all those points back. Twiddling my thumbs wasn't in my nature. I needed to calculate a way to use that guy. I didn't know if there was any way to control their migration, but I needed to try. Before that, I needed to take care of Samon's dungeon first. The quick-witted demons nearby would try to occupy it. However, there would be a period of confusion where they wouldn't move. I needed to take advantage of this period. There was a need to clearly obtain that spot. Fight. I shook my head and moved to Japan's dungeon. Afterwards, I used Turtle Island to head to China. Nanjing, Jiangsu Province, China. The place where Earl Simon's dungeon was located. It was closer than I thought and all the lamps were dark. It was in a remote location that could be reached by train. It is great to see Master. Krasla descended on the griffin and went down on one knee. There were hundreds of shades around him. Their bodies were dusty like they hadn't washed. The griffin occasionally hit the ground. Kung. The ground would shake. All of them had moved for a long time. It was enough for praise. You did well. I'm sorry that I didn't find it faster. No. I looked over the dungeon. I was approximately 500 meters away but could clearly see the dungeon. There were skeletons and zombies walking around. There were also occasion orcs and slime. An inferior quality. The fairy of the dungeon could only move the creatures outside. But the level of the creatures was very low. The highest among them were still low grade. There were a few expensive creatures but the overall level was low. The problem was choice and quantity, so it made sense he had belonged to Upa's faction. He was already dead but I wanted to praise his ignorance. Is that all? I asked just in case. Krasla briefly thought for a moment before saying. The entrance is completely blocked so it is impossible to scout. The shades as well? The shades had a half-spiritual body. They could avoid the low-quality creatures and enter the dungeon. Their speed was also quite fast. Krasla shook his head. The Shadow Sinners are located at the entrance to the dungeon. I didn't want to carelessly cause a war so I decided to wait for Master. Shadow Sinners. An advanced 3LV evolved form of the Shades. The Shadow Sinners made it impossible for the Shades to pierce through. Well done. I gave a small nod. There was no telling what the fairy would do. I needed to sweep them all at once. Krasla tensed up and said, if you give the order then I will thoroughly cleanse the dungeon. No, I will take on this task. Will it be okay? Dungeon Master is too high ranking to do something like this. It sounded like flattery but he meant it. I wasn't required to deal with low-grade creatures. But in this case, I needed to stand at the forefront. I must clearly show that I am occupying the dungeon. It was because the dungeon's fairy was watching. The anxious fairy had blocked the entrance after the death of the demon. It would observe anyone that tried to come in. It would watch closely the moment the offensive started and I would show my overwhelming power. Then things would become simpler. I wore the red cloth, sloth, and held wrath. I even triggered a secondary item. It was to show a more authentic appearance. Paranormal. One of the 5 blessings of paranormal, strong attraction, has been applied. Those who come near, or see your laugh, from then on, they will be your slave. But, I'm sorry, the immutable laws can't be helped. Smiling at orcs or elves. The perfection of the face. It would still be more significant than the default setting. I started frowning. The odds are really strange. Increasing all stats by 2 for an hour or increasing magic power by 5 for 30 minutes. I had never seen those 2 blessings. Quite strange. I got unlimited energy 2 times. It was like this when I needed to go into a fight. In the future, I should only use it when absolutely necessary. I couldn't show such a clumsy appearance in a fight for my life. It wasn't very good news. I clicked my tongue. Krasla, the griffin, the lich, the Spartwa and the 200 saber tigers were behind me. Keng, I raised wrath high into the sky. And the sword stretched forward. Follow me. Annihilate the enemy. In fact, I was sorry for the enemy. Right now, even the saber tigers could handle the orcs. They had hunted orcs many times so they were straightforward opponents. The Spartwa were made from the bones of a dragon and their whole bodies were excellent weapons. Not to mention the lich, griffin and Krasla. But, I was the one leading them. I breached through thousands of low-grade creatures until I reached the entrance of the dungeon. It was where I found the Shadow Sinners. They were creatures that I fought in the United Kingdom. My abilities now couldn't be compared to then. Sook, the chains attached to their feet. The connected iron sphere quickly moved through the air. Tiak, however, I didn't avoid it. I reached out and caught the flying iron sphere. The effect of 95 strength. Strength had almost transcended that wall so the iron spheres thrown by the Shadow Sinners were like child's play. Get out of the way. I am going to see your master. Advanced creatures had high intelligence. They could understand my words. There was also the fairy watching. Even so, there were no signs so it meant negotiations didn't succeed. It is still lacking. Iron spheres. Dark sword. Buong. A dark aura surrounded Wrath. Unlike Wrath or Sloth, Dark sword was a skill applied directly to the item. I could use it to separate the air. The Shadow Sinners watched Dark sword with confusion. They took one step back and were extremely vigilant. The basic darkness? Darkness could recognize darkness. The Shadow Sinners were born from fear and could understand Dark sword. However, they realized too late. I hated saying something twice, so I didn't repeat my previous words. I kicked off the ground, and the startled Shadow Sinners threw their iron spheres at me. Quirk. The iron spheres stretched across the area. At the same time, the Shadow Sinners twisted the chains. Kung. The chains brushed past me. The ground was deep and they were trying to pressure me to stop moving around so freely. I just snapped the chains with my sword. I also cut the Shadow Sinner that I appeared in front of. But it didn't restore itself. The Shadow Sinners were very confused. They didn't use their chains and retreated even further. Indeed, I gave a pleased smile. Wounds caused by Dark sword couldn't be healed. It wasn't just confined to biological wounds. Substances made of magic power were also valid. It was a lot more useful than I thought. Achievements store. I had been hit in the back of the head by the cruel commander's core, but Dark sword was a proper skill. Swak. I only admired it for a moment. I turned and sliced off the head of the Shadow Sinner. The Griffin dealt with a number of slimes using the fire and lightning skill. The Lich played with the zombies. The zombies were dead, so they couldn't avoid the Lich's corpse explosion skill. Those with high intelligence wouldn't suffer from it, but the low-grade creatures didn't have those type of defenses. Everything is almost cleaned up. They had handled thousands of creatures in only 20 minutes. The difference in quality with the creatures I brought was too great. And I was the director of the damage. I will give support. Krasla approached me with his red spear. I said quietly, "Come along. Increase the speed." The result of the fight was determined. There was no need to waste time. I reached the top floor in a flash and looked at the dungeon core. There was little change in the configuration of the creatures behind me. Only 5 saber tigers had died. Will you smash 6-6 core? 6-6? That is your name? Above the dungeon core, there was a fairy with both hands on her waist. Yes, that's right. My name is 6-6. And smash me. 6-6 will go back to nature. 6-6 doesn't know who you are, but 6-6 won't join another master after Saman. The nature of the fairy. 6-6 would say, 6-6, when she was upset. In any case, demons were all the same when it came to abusing the fairies. Saman was like that with 6-6. So her reaction was like that. I said lightly, "Join me." Aren't those words like tea and honey? Tea and honey? Those two have the worst chemistry. It is bad to eat together. It was a clear answer. 6-6. I do not persecute fairies. You will notice that I have the blessing of a fairy. You have the blessing of the fairy? Where? Kung. 6-6 eyes flashed as she sniffed like a dog. This smells like Yihi? You know Yihi? I know. A wicked bitch. She acts like she is better than other fairies and then pouts when she needs to play alone. She even stepped on a gift of flowers that 6-6 gave her. 6-6 took a deep breath after her yell. I never thought there would be such a relationship between the two. I could feel a headache coming on. That is regrettable. The light from the very rare flower faded. 6-6 struggled for years because of it. You can tell her yourself if you join. If I didn't speak, then it might not ever end. You will really become the devil? I won't allow any other person to sit on that seat. But I don't want the Fairy King to be Yihi. I will give an equal chance to all fairies. And the Fairy King will be decided by the performance of the fairies. Wouldn't you like to have a chance to become the Fairy King someday? That's right. 6-6 was deep in thoughts. She sneaked a peek at me and then the creatures behind me. Overwhelming actions. Advanced creatures. She started to compare it to Earl Saman. Abandon the existing contract and sign a new one. Then she could avoid the penalty of destruction. Of course she would have some concerns. Approximately 10 minutes passed before 6-6 opened her mouth. Okay, I won't return to nature. Saman didn't have any chance to make 6-6 the king. But isn't it different now? Then I will call you Dungeon Master. Finally I achieved it. I put wrath away and said, "Don't worry. You have taken over the dungeon. 1 extra stat point has been obtained. 1,000 achievement points will be added. The message window came up now that the contract was complete. At the same time, an intense light emerged from Japan's dungeon. The magic circle for movement between the 3 dungeons in South Korea, Japan and China was completed. Now I will go see him. My eyes narrowed. The cruel commander. I obtained Samon's dungeon, so now it was time to punish the wayward mutt. I wanted to look for the creature at the altar, but it would take time to do that. The cruel commander was busy running around. He caused blood to flow wherever his feet touched. If they wiped out the humans, then it would contribute to the destruction. Craziness. I could only think of those words. Thanks to that, not only in China but demons in other areas noticed the abnormalities. Troublesome. It had been some time since the angels attacked. The power of a duke or grand duke was enough to be threatening. I didn't know the limits of the cruel commander and his troops. In order to prepare the cruel commander, I needed to inject some awareness into him. I would also try to balance their slaughter of humans with those of demons. Anyway, they were mercenaries that would disappear after 90 days. It would be a benefit if any demons died. Even if it was a bit discouraging, the 6,000 achievement points was worth it if other demons were killed. Of course, this also included Samon's dungeon. I was able to occupy it quickly due to the cruel commander. I looked down at the ground from aboard the Griffin. Hundreds of humans were holding weapons and trying to block me. It was a situation where they were trying to confront me. Griffin, sweep them all up. Key, mere lightning, emerged from the Griffin's mouth. The Griffin's unique skill that swept everything up. KWA Ru Rung. Fire and lightning hit the ground and melted everything. The humans were only armed with crude weapons and received serious injuries. The handful of surviving humans ran away terrified. The destruction contribution would slowly climb by killing thousands of humans. I didn't pay attention to hundreds. Instead, the best way to not raise contribution anymore was to stop the cruel commander. The saber tigers snatched the fleeing humans. Finally, I turned my head to the structure that I could see. For the Emperor, just like his name, the cruel commander had no mercy. His 50,000 troops had already slaughtered thousands of humans, but his thirst for blood didn't stop. The 50,000 troops got rid of all living things. The golden sword gleamed with every thrust. He was busy commanding the main army to hit the demon's dungeon. He had already gone through thousands of low-grade creatures up to the 20th floor. For now, it was going smoothly. His corps were all experienced warriors. His army would only start dying in front of stronger creatures. The yin magic power is climbing up. The cruel commander clenched his teeth. He couldn't forgive the demons for trying to rob the treasure. They invaded the middle world and threatened the Emperor. The Emperor would have united the whole continent if it wasn't for those guys. Due to God's curse, it is His Majesty's fate to stop the demons. And he hated the one called God more than the demons. A transcendent person too strong for the Emperor's army. The god cursed the Emperor in order to restore the balance. Stop the demons invading the middle world. The fate of a guardian. The Emperor gambled his life in order to throw off the confines of fate. He firmly walked down a path of stigma. This was the reason why the cruel commander and his army guarded the warehouses so desperately. If the Emperor died, he just laughed and continued to kill. The fate of the guardians and what that meant. These damn scum. How dare you make me use my points? Don't even think about leaving alive. At that moment, there was a large number of creatures. The quality of the creatures was completely different from before. And there was a demon in the center. It won't be easy, the cruel commander thought. The army had split into 10 groups, so he had come here with 5,000 troops. It was reduced to 4,000 while attacking the dungeon. The demon didn't look very good. The awful appearance was because he had used too many points. The cruel commander didn't know what it meant, so he just pulled out a giant axe. I will take on the cruel commander. I will beat you to a pulp. Fall back. No matter how cruel, he was still a commander. There was no need to fight in the middle of enemy territory. What? Fall back? These fools. I will let you know that. The demon led the creatures and started the chase. It was a tense chase. But the experienced cruel commander gave excellent commands, so the skeletons didn't receive any damage while moving. And just like he knew the situation, the powerful skeleton knights were placed at the entrance. The cruel commander quickly joined the soldiers outside the dungeon. The demon and creatures followed. The soldiers not attacking other dungeons joined and increased the numbers to 13,000. But he didn't show the number to the demon. He sent them to different places and ordered them to wait. And then they revealed themselves when the demon and creatures entered the narrow terrain. For the emperor, Kung, an orderly manner, the loud sound of the simultaneous footsteps were enough to give an intimidating presence. These undead bastards, don't be so cocky, Marquis Delit. He had returned straight to his dungeon after receiving the siege message. He sent the news to Grand Duke Okulos at the same time, but the cruel commander and his corps were surprisingly powerful. He already lost a significant number of creatures while attacking the angels. He had to use his points with trembling hands. He had wanted to save it for the Demon World auction, so it was natural to feel furious. However, the resistance decreased as he fell into a trap. Quadaduke, there was no escape anywhere. It was well planned out. They slowly but surely tightened around the creatures. Kill, Delit cried out with anger. The fight was heating up. Delit wasn't someone to be trifled with. He used almost all the 1.5 million points gained from the angel hunt. It made sense that such power could match the skeleton soldiers. Drag out the time. However, Delit started to feel the threat to his life. The number of creatures were gradually reducing. If it stayed this way, then he would die. But he had a chance of winning if he bought more time. Grand Duke Okulos wouldn't stay still if a demon in his faction was at a risk of dying. He had requested assistance from Okulos, who was moving here. The undead would find it impossible to deal with him. He immediately changed from offense to defense. It was to buy some time. And, Xiao, a huge green stem shot out from the ground. The circumference was 5 meters, but it gave off a formidable presence that could easily reach tens of meters. Quang, the stem towered over the skeleton soldiers. A familiar skill. Delit smiled. My master, Okulos Nim. Okulos and 3 dukes. The situation was reversed again. When I arrived in the footsteps of the cruel commander, corpses were strewn all over. It seemed like the battle wasn't over. The cruel commander was leading his army against tens of thousands of creatures. Was I one step too late? I frowned. 5 demons caught my eye. The cruel commander gave an order to push them, but they were enduring. The cruel commander and his troops were facing a small number of demons. Okulos, and the dukes. This was an impediment, a rather large one. The final boss had appeared at the dungeon. They were drawn out. Right now, I wanted to focus on Grand Duke Upa. Okulos being here wasn't a good thing. Okulos was famous, but I never knew what he was thinking. Ariel, Upa and Pandemonium had characteristics that I could use to make plans. However, Okulos was different. In my previous life, he didn't seem to be greedy for the position of devil despite having many advantages. In addition, he had many eccentricities that I couldn't understand. But he wasn't stupid. He gained advantages faster than anyone else. Okulos had a number of achievements and benefits from special events. Someone who wasn't easily measurable. The most difficult opponent among the Grand Dukes. In addition, he brought a small number of creatures. The cruel commander was there, but I made a wise decision not to face him directly. They were in the middle of a fight, so I wouldn't be noticed. Now was the perfect time to remove myself. At that moment, one of the creatures fell. The cruel commander's eyes turned towards me. He was quite a distance away but looked exactly at me. Keng. A short silence. It seemed like he couldn't believe what he was seeing as his sword dropped. This magic power. This overwhelming presence. And his body trembled. Your Majesty. He directed his horse and started moving towards me. I panicked for a moment. Your Majesty? What did that mean? Numerous soldiers were coming along with the cruel commander. It was chaos. The orderly appearance they had shown so far couldn't be seen. They paid no attention to the creatures around them. Falling, throwing shields, pandemonium. Even the bodies of allies were stepped on. Okuyo's expression was asking, what are they doing? The cruel commander ran. Soldiers? He showed no signs of caring about them. Thanks to that, he was the first to reach me. Chiok. He dismounted from the horse and took off his helmet. And knelt down. I seek an audience with the new emperor. A scar-covered face. It gave a manly appearance, but that made no difference to me. Something like this wasn't expected. Coming up to me and kneeling out of nowhere. The cruel commander had a tearful expression. Tears couldn't come out because of his dead body, but he would be shedding tears right now. Finally, you've finally taken off your constraints. Ha ha ha. Now you can preside over the continent and mock God. Ha 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 ha. I don't know what you mean. Ah, you still don't remember completely? Certainly, it seems like not all the magic power in the heart is opened. Don't worry, I know that you will wake up. We will help your majesty defeat God. The soldiers lined up behind him. There were only bones remaining, so their bodies clattered. Excitement, growing excitement, heart? I clearly heard the word, heart. Heart of the Hell Monarch. The heart of the Hell Monarch I accidentally obtained from the Easter egg. It was associated with the cruel commander? Chapter 98 to 99 Grand Duke Oculos. Rather, I started to get a headache. Several situations had twisted together. It seemed like I wouldn't be able to easily solve this. I glanced towards Oculos and the dukes. A quandary. The cruel commander really made everything become tangled up. The cruel commander and his corps who called me master. I somehow gained the qualifications to cut off the cruel commander's head here. I didn't know why he referred to me as the emperor. But, waking up, I caught those words. This guy obviously knew about the heart of the Hell Monarch. The heart of the Hell Monarch played an important role in raising my intelligence. Even so, he said that it had yet to fully awaken. If awakened properly, then my problem could be solved. The problem of how to get out of this crisis. I immediately looked with mind's eye. Name: Cruel Commander Maxium. Occupation: Emperor's Knight. Title: No Decay. U. Strength +6. Steadfast. U. Stamina +6. Undead Commander. XU. Agility and Intelligence +4. Stats: Strength 85, +6, Intelligence 82, +4. Agility 81, +4, Stamina 88, +6. Magic Power 74, Potential 410 + 2410. Uniqueness: a faithful knight defending the treasure trove for tens of thousands of years. Skill: Lustrous Golden Sword, Epic. Cruel Leadership, Epic. Relative comparison: Randolph Brigzeal, Strength 95, Intelligence 77, Agility 90, Stamina 85, Magic 96, Potential 392 + 51 500ths. Cruel Commander Maxium, Strength 91, Intelligence 86, Agility 85, Stamina 94, Magic 74, Potential 410 + 2410ths. It was considerable. He reached all his potential and even got 430 points. He had as much as 3 titles. And there were 2 epic grade skills. There is no growth potential, so he is in an almost finished form. This was enough for a high-class creature. A little stronger than the Griffin or Gigantes. The skeleton soldiers around were also usable. The regular soldiers were intermediate level while the knights reached advanced. Greed emerged. Nevertheless, it was too early to have Oculos as an enemy. I was wearing a mask, but that wouldn't be able to fool a Grand Duke's keen eyes. Then Cruel Commander Maxium said to me, "Your Majesty, the new Maxium will help you by sweeping away the dirty demons and creatures. After a long time, I finally have the privilege of fighting on the battlefield with you." His eyes shone. It was filled with expectations. But my eyes were still looking at Oculos. He was slowly moving towards me with the dukes. I don't know what to do. Overall, I was weak. Maxium's army was decreased. His numbers were similar to the creatures. In qualitative aspects, I was slightly lacking. I had a chance of winning if I faced the Grand Duke and Dukes. But one direct hit might reveal my identity. However, my concerns were surprisingly useless. Randolph Brigzeal, Oculos said to me, "I really couldn't deceive a Grand Duke? I was able to outsmart the Marquis and Earls gathered in front of South Korea's dungeon." Even Tashmal was unsure, but Grand Duke Oculos was certain as soon as he saw me. To make matters worse, it is bittersweet. I inwardly sighed. It was already exposed. I took off the mask. And I pulled out Wrath. First, reveal my strength. I need to do a lot of damage. Tilt the balance of power fully onto my side. If there was an all-out war with Oculos, then the damage would be very serious. So it was best if I took action before Oculos. I organized my thoughts and opened my mouth. "Maxium, follow me. New Maxium, I will show my constant loyalty to your Majesty." He knelt down as his body trembled. It was the same for the other skeleton soldiers. Their appearance seemed like they were having an epileptic seizure. Despite having the chance of freedom, they never seized it. Loyalty. Despite the fact that my memories were incomplete, Maxim didn't care. First he would deal with this situation before worrying about the awakening. In the future, it would naturally open. The skeleton soldiers quickly drew back. Dark Sword. Buong. Wrath was surrounded by darkness. Paranormal. One of the 5 blessings of paranormal. All stats plus 2 feet for an hour has been applied. Finally, it was the first time I received a useful blessing. Did it depend on the chances of victory? Anyway, it was good news. The griffin flew in the sky while the Spartwa, Lich and Saber tigers followed closely. Maxim? He was standing right next to me. Your Majesty, do you need a mount? I will dedicate myself. There is no need. I would show my worth with my own 2 feet. I had no need for a mount. I quietly watched the front. Okulos and the other demons were advancing. They won't let me pass. I needed to hit them without fail. Tisk. Things had been so twisted. I lifted wrath and said, "Follow me. Annihilate the enemy." Kung. A large step forward. All the troops moved forward at the signal. Twin-head ogres. An advanced 4LV creature that was a variant of the normal ogres. 3 twin-head ogres hacked away at the skeletons. Pung. Pepping. Genome flies. The advanced 5LV creatures that could use self-destruct. They were only 1 meter in size, but tens of thousands of them self-destructing would cause huge damage. Creatures that weren't sold in the store of all things. It also didn't appear at the Demon World auction. A creature obtained through special events. They were creatures that needed to be disposed of, but I had to handle something else first. Kwang. Okuyo's skill, Nature's Punishment, had emerged from the ground. A huge, green stalk popped out in front of me. Next, the other 3 dukes hindered my movements. It isn't easy to face the 4 of them. In my previous life, I would not have been able to handle a duke properly. But now I was strong. Stronger. I would be able to confront the 4 of them. This situation was a problem, but I should be able to beat at least one opponent. This guy. Let's see you avoid being damaged by this. Paysak. I hurriedly twisted my body to avoid an attack. Duke Karki. One of Okuyo's 3 thugs and a demon famous for his light spray. But thanks to paranormal, my agility had reached 92. My senses were always active. I moved as I detected the attack. But my goal wasn't Karki. Okulos. He was the only one I was running towards. There was persistent interference, but I almost reached him. I looked at Okulos and opened mind's eye. Name. Okulos. Occupation Demon Grand Duke, Dungeon Master. Title *1 who deals with nature, epic, intelligence +4, magic power +7. Master of the largest forest Olmod, epic, all stats +3. Stats, strength 73, +3, intelligence 85, +7. Agility 83, +3, stamina 73, +3. Magic power 87, +1. Potential 401 + 26 500ths. Uniqueness. The heartbeat of the forest can be heard. The only demon to deal with nature. Skill. Nature's Punishment, epic, naturalization, epic, pending question, U. Relative comparison. Randolph Brigzeal. Strength 97, intelligence 79, agility 92, stamina 87, magic 98, potential 392 + 61 500ths. All stats +2 due to paranormal. Okulos. Strength 76, intelligence 92, agility 86, stamina 76, magic 98, potential 401 + 26 500ths. He wasn't a Grand Duke for nothing. High stats. The Dukes also had stats close to 400. This was their pure abilities without the help of items like me. If I stayed stagnant, then they would have caught up with me in a year or 2. This would be tight. I had no intention of going easy on them since they knew my identity. Right now, I was in a position where I was their enemy. Chihuahahik. Nature's Punishment. I sliced the giant, green stalk. The magic power was similar, so the attack worked well. But that also applied to me. There was a need to be as careful as possible. I maintained a distance of 200 meters from Okulos. It was a distance I could cross in one jump. It had taken me 40 minutes to reach this location. At that moment, Okuyo's cool eyes fell on my body. Pending question, U, has been triggered. It is looking for Randolph Briggseel's weakness. Mind's Eye, XU, has successfully detected it. Defended against 70%. Intelligence calibration. But the opponent's magic power is too high. Defended against 81%. Defense against pending question, U, has succeeded. I started frowning. Grand Duke Ariel also had a mental skill. Okuyo's pending question seemed to be something similar. The difference was that it was looking for a weak point instead of dominating the opponent. It would have affected me if it wasn't for Mind's Eye. I wasn't sure what my weaknesses were, but pending question would have found it. Anyway, the presence of Mind's Eye was quite helpful. Okuyo's face twitched slightly, a surprised expression. I leapt forward with wrath. Sock, I cut something. But it wasn't Okuyo's. Countless branches had emerged from Okuyo's body. They were blocking wrath. Okuyo's gave a slight smile. Randolph Briggseel. I pointed wrath at him. You managed to recognize me. Yes, you are quite interesting. The words reached the cruel commander and his army. I just laughed. I'm glad that you find me interesting. Hoo-hoo. Interesting, interesting. I have been keeping an eye on you since the beginning. Ever since you challenged us in the demon world. I think you have grown into a really interesting person. I was at a loss for words. Certainly, I had once challenged the Grand Dukes. Ariel broke me and I was never Upa's opponent. Pandemonium? He thoroughly enjoyed torturing me. Okuyo's had looked at me with an unknown expression and cut off my arm. But I didn't think any of them had remembered me. Ariel and Pandemonium treated me like it was the first time we met. It was natural for Upa not to know me since we never met in the demon world. But, he remembered? I closed my mouth. I clenched my fists with rage. I never thought anyone would remember me, but this guy had just brought up my past. Mysterious. A really weird feeling that was hard to describe in words. Joy, bliss? There were no such things. I didn't know how to explain this anger and annoyance. Unlucky. That's right. It was really unlucky. Okuyo's expression subtly changed, but underneath was a mixture of interesting. I remember the first time you walked into the center of my forest. Ah, that made sense. The enormous Olmot forest. Okuyo's was the master. It had taken me 1 year to find and challenge him. Now I would never do that again. That 1 year hadn't been for nothing. I still had bad luck. I frowned as I recalled that time. I found you interesting, so I didn't cut your throat. Then he sent me a chilly gaze. The 3 dukes were ready to jump at me at any time. Dark sword was pointed at Okuyo's, so it wasn't easy for them to recklessly jump in. Certainly you seem to have grown. Somehow you seem to have some knowledge. I am curious about the secret behind your strength and the high-class creatures. Okuyo's didn't lose his leisurely air. First, there were 3 dukes surrounding them. He also had faith in his skills. He had the upper hand in the situation. There was no need for him to be impatient. In addition, he was confident that he could catch me at any time. Okuyo's turned and looked at Maxim. I will punish the undead that attacked the dungeon of my demons. You can leave if the cruel commander is left behind. That isn't possible. Leaving him behind wasn't a big thing. But the cruel commander knew something about the heart's awakening. Additionally, I didn't like leaving any of my property behind. An opponent acting free and confident towards me was unacceptable. My primary goal was to create tension among the Grand Dukes and win the throne. I couldn't show weakness in our first encounter. I lightly chanted, Wrath, high magic power, 98, has caused strength, agility and stamina to rise by 9. Intelligence has dropped by 20, but your original pure intelligence is more than 76. Due to the unique characteristics caused by astral code, you won't be taken over by the Wrath state. Strength 106, agility 101, stamina 96. Including the effect from paranormal, 2 stats had risen beyond 100. Of course, paranormal's blessing only had 10 minutes remaining, but I didn't care. The blood vessels in my body reduced and my heart beat faster. I wasn't taken over by an abnormal state. However, intelligence was greatly lowered due to the Wrath skill. I can use it in conjunction with Sloth, but I recalled the terrible time when I tested both Wrath and Sloth. There was no need to risk attacking my allies. Wrath was enough. I had my reason, but I was still in a state of excitement. I automatically clenched my teeth. My sword trembled. The darkness in the surrounding area increased. I lifted my gaze and faced Okuyo's. Okulos detected danger and his brows furrowed. A number of blue lights immediately emerged from his body. Roots entered the ground and he became a strong tree that wouldn't move. An instinctive movement. This change wasn't unusual to me. Epic grade skill, naturalization. The downside was that Okulos couldn't move, but this skill gave him absolute defense and offense. Suok. Thousands of long grass started sprouting and grabbed hold of me. The grass stretching from the ground meant I had a limited space to move. I couldn't simply demonstrate strong attacks. But I clearly saw small gaps where my sword could enter. This was due to agility. Once it went beyond 100, I could see things I normally couldn't. I made decisions with cold reason. My eyes didn't leave Okulos. Okulos, I will make you aware of it. I was still immature when I was running around the demon world. I was an enemy that could truly threaten him. Slowly but surely, I started to move through the gaps. Cruel Commander Maxium. He kept an eye on his master while causing devastation on the battlefield. The magic power that could be felt even from a distance was obviously the heart of the Emperor. The reason why it entered the body of a demon didn't matter. Maxium was excited by the overwhelming appearance of the demon. Electrifying. The power to beat everything. The sword moved quickly and the afterimage struck countless enemies. He would unleash a stronger power as he fell into a deeper crisis. For the great Emperor, Maxium wielded his golden sword. The sword now emitted a brilliant light. The great Emperor, his master, was struggling alone in enemy territory. Dalguric, Dalguric, the skeleton soldiers moved. He directed them to certain positions. They cut the necks of the enemies and advanced forward. The limbs were cut off as they moved. Their bodies continued advancing even without arms or legs. A switch in momentum. The battle became taut. At the same time, the griffin and other creatures couldn't be ignored. They weren't under Maxium's command, so he disliked them. But they were the Emperor's creatures. Ha ha ha, look, the demons are being overcome by His Majesty's overwhelming power. Maxium laughed while wielding his sword. From Maxium's point of view, the four demons didn't have a strong partnership. In particular, one person felt completely different from the rest. But those demons, they weren't all his opponents. Even if he couldn't recover all his power, Maxium had no doubts about the Emperor's victory. It was a breathtaking moment as he felt his master's power rise by leaps and bounds in front of certain demons. The air started vibrating from an abnormal change. And the struggle started. Great, Your Majesty, take care. Kung, Kung, Kung. All the skeletons knocked on their shield with their sword. The sound resonated and spread all over the place. A cheer, roars, praying for his victory. He should not be defeated. Winning was the only way to prove himself. Maxium kept an eye on the Emperor's fight against the demons. Ha ha ha, he wasn't amused. The Emperor was forced to fight in a confined space and were surrounded by demons. He frowned every time the tree-like demon Okulos was cut. He couldn't feel relieved. The branches cut by Dark Sword couldn't recover. Thousands of branches had to be sliced by the sword before eventually revealing the underside. The remaining three dukes, two of them didn't even enter the fight. They couldn't find any gaps. Maxium couldn't help even if he wanted to. He couldn't barge into the fight. He shook his head. The fight was violent and sharp. His hands unconsciously started trembling, but he soothed them. This was the battlefield given to him. He could stop some worry by taking care of this fight. Chawahik. At that moment, the Emperor's sword fiercely sliced the body of a demon. It wasn't a fatal blow, but it was adequate. His face changed. It wasn't complete, but there was a small smile. His master couldn't help smiling. It was then that Maxium realized. He would win. Our god has returned. His heart had already stopped, but it was burning hot. 10 minutes passed. Paranormal's blessing finished. At the same time, I succeeded in leaving a long stab in Okuyo's side. Next is the neck. Sick. I smiled, revealing my teeth. Okulos had a confused expression. Are you really Randolph Briggseel? Then who are you looking at? Who are you? The attitude wasn't easily recognized. It was natural. I was completely different compared to the demon world. Decades had passed for me before I came back in time. He thought I only became moderately stronger, but I brutally broke his defenses. He no longer mentioned, interesting. All that confidence had disappeared. Okulos Nim. The dukes approached them, but Okulos stretched out his hand and stopped them. I can see with naturalization. I know the essence of all life. You are not Randolph Briggseal. Don't make me laugh. Aren't you just trying to escape? Okulos opened his mouth. He seemed to be suspicious of something, but Okulos couldn't express it. Okulos hesitated for 10 seconds before shaking his head. There is not beneficial for both sides to be fighting each other. That skill of yours is gone and I won't be able to stay in this state much longer. How about we withdraw for now? It was accurate. I didn't know how much longer wrath would last. Prolonging this fight would do more harm than good. What? Haha. But I just let out a big laugh. One of the 4 Grand Dukes, Okulos, had requested a truce. You certainly have an abnormal growth. If you are lucky, then you might be able to kill me here. But you also can't avoid death. That was also right. Okuyo's words were likely to be true. I knew that this battlefield was fierce. It wouldn't be easy to get away from the 3 dukes when I was in a weakened state. Is it really like that? But I couldn't just accept it. Do you want to go to the end? Okulos asked like I was stupid. Give up one arm. Then I will think about it. I suggested. I couldn't let go so easily. And in fact, Okulos was better alive than dead. If Okulos disappeared, then the balance of power would be completely destroyed. The entire situation might get back to the other Grand Dukes. If Okulos died, then the rest of the demons would scale up rapidly. In addition, variables would appear. If I wanted to get rid of the variables, I would need to get rid of the rest of the demons in Okuyo's faction. Grand Duke Upa was also my enemy right now. It was still too premature. One arm, cheaper than I thought. Okulos knew that it would never recover if I cut off his arm with Dark Sword. Even so, he gracefully accepted. Obviously something had happened to make him change his mind. Okulos Nim. The dukes were filled with resentment. However, Okuyo's expression didn't change. You don't have to worry. I got my hands on some very large information today. The value of my arm can't even be compared. At that moment, the dukes became quiet. They only said a few words of complaints. A bluff? Okulos was quite unknown, so it wasn't easy for me to determine what was true or false. Personally, I thought he was just bluffing. There had to be a reason why the dukes were looking like that. Cut it. Okulos released naturalization and held out his right arm. Okulos directly stretched out his arm towards me. It wasn't easy to remember that he was a Grand Duke. I grasped wrath. And, Sook, duck. The war was over. Okulos and his demons started to back off. I stepped back after cutting off Okuyo's right arm. I looked at the situation around me. In less than an hour, the troops had been reduced by more than half. I could tell how long and violently they had been fighting. Your Majesty, the cruel commander Maxium came running over. I blocked him from kneeling down. I caught Maxium's shoulder and looked straight into his eyes. The way to awaken the heart. What is it? Chapter 100. Dubalong's request. The skill effect of wrath ended shortly afterwards. It was fast. I judged the battle was over, so there was no need to hold onto the effects. Additionally, the fight with Okulos ended smoothly, but this wasn't over. We had already fought, so one of my weapons against Okulos had disappeared. I could also determine some things. I could make some preparations. I also confirmed that the Grand Dukes would never form an alliance with each other. Okulos had no contact with them at all. Okulos seemed to occupy a halfway position like watered-down alcohol. However, at the end he mentioned that he obtained some large information. It was possible this was a bluff, but he was an opponent whose actions couldn't be predicted. The heart needs to be awakened properly. I asked the cruel commander despite the risk. I could be stabbed in the neck if I wasn't prepared for the awakening. Maxium was also nervous. He held out his sword in its scabbard. The Emperor gave me this sword. I grasped the scabbard. At the same time, I checked it with mind's eye. Name: the Emperor's Sword, Epic, Ego. Description: a sword favored by the Shadow Emperor. It was created with wrought iron, martanium and intense magic spells to form an ego. Asterisk: unable to be destroyed. Dignity will rise significantly. It is possible to use Emperor's Army once every 10 years. Asterisk asterisk asterisk: the spirit of the sword is unavailable. The description didn't say anything about awakening. The ego part of the sword stood out and I was curious about Emperor's Army, but that wasn't the priority right now. What is this sword? I asked with a frown and Maxium explained. The sword that has a spirit dwelling inside it. The sword can think for itself. It doesn't recognize my hands but might open for your majesty. The sword spirit. The emperor entrusted me with this sword before going to his eternal rest. He asked me to return it when he came back. The sword is incomplete, so it might be able to complete you. So there were some groundworks laid for the awakening. I pulled out the sword instantly. A brilliantly shining gold sword was revealed. Ying. The sword started vibrating. It tried to make me drop it as it rejected me. But at that moment, Divine Sword Unity, XU, passive, has been triggered. The ego dwelling inside, the Emperor's sword, has succumbed to the user. The ego had become gentle due to Divine Sword Unity. The sword stopped vibrating and acted properly in my hand. After the approval, it felt familiar, like I had used it before. But that was it. The ego didn't talk to me. Was it originally like this? Ego sword. The number present in the demon world was very low. I had never touched one. And the ego in the sword didn't show any visible response. I tapped it with my fingers. There was no response. Ah, as expected, you have received the recognition of the sword. I had faith. However, Maxim cried out with admiration next to me. He seemed impressed as he formed a tight fist. I scowled and asked, "Now what?" "I don't know the details. Just to return this sword. Actually, I only received permission to touch it." "That is no help. I'm really sorry." Maxim bowed his head. Tisk. I clicked my tongue. It was a clue, but I didn't know how to make it work. Anyway, I was satisfied that I obtained a sword with an epic rating. The problem was that there were many ambiguous points. Anyway, the Shadow Emperor had left the sword behind, so there was obviously something. Emperor's Army. I checked the skill of the sword. It could only be used once every 10 years, so I read the detailed explanation. Name: the Emperor's Army. Description: over 100,000 feet ghost cavalry that exist in an underground warehouse can be summoned. The ghost cavalry have no flesh and will wipe out the user's enemies. They will return to their original location after 90 days. Not all the soldiers were summoned here with Maxim and the skeletons. I realized the quality of the Shadow Emperor's army and why he was so feared. At that time, Maxim fell on both knees and begged, "Your Majesty, it is time to build a new empire once you return to the continent. Maxim will help you regain your position." "That isn't possible. I had no way of getting to the Shadow Emperor's continent." Then Maxim glanced towards me. "How can I leave you behind? This is a world of thieves. It seems to be different but similar to the demon world. I have something to achieve here. Until I achieve it, I have no intention of leaving." "What is it? Can't I help you? You can't stay here for a long time, right?" "That's right. The magic power is a little scattered. After some time, we will be returned to the warehouse." Maxim showed signs of dissatisfaction as he spoke. It was expected. The system didn't like me. "But, I can still help your Majesty even if it is only a short period. Maxim and the soldiers will be happy to help." Maxim cried out. There was still a bit of time left. It was inevitable that the skeleton soldiers would be put to work. They showed a willingness to help without any complaints. Increasing my dungeons right now isn't very wise. Grand Duke Upa's faction had already lost a dungeon, so he would notice if he lost 2 or 3. The dungeons in China were probably prepared for an attack. At the very least, I needed to take a look at the dungeons in China. But it is fine to cause some damage. I nodded lightly. "I will designate you some dungeons. Causing them to lose some creatures will be of help to me," I said flatly. Anyway, the troops would go back eventually. It didn't matter how many skeleton soldiers died. "We will follow your words," Maxim replied without any doubts. Maxim and his army appeared for exactly 90 days. Maxim stopped hunting humans and focused on the dungeons I specified. Both dungeons belonged to Upa's faction. He was greatly passionate about helping the Emperor. Eventually, there weren't many soldiers remaining. I earned a little more than 4 million points. The damage to the demons was at least 2 million points. I gained 1 dungeon and got my hands on an epic grade sword. Furthermore, I got some confirmation about awakening. My pure intelligence rose by 2. This had to mean something. I didn't know if it was awakening, but the Emperor's sword was clearly the right key. Just holding it in my hands stimulated the heart to increase my stats. They were connected to each other. Anyway, time passed quickly and the day finally arrived. Maxium and the few thousand soldiers left after hitting the dungeons belonging to Upa's faction in China looked upset. Your Majesty, good work, can't we go together? I have already said it. I have things to accomplish here. Maxium regarded me as his emperor. He treated me as sacred. I was considered to be the sun and moon, so Maxium worried endlessly about me. And he ultimately believed in me. Plus, he wanted to please me. Maxium's expression turned sad. His appearance didn't fit the title of cruel commander at all. He fell to his knees. Maxium will look forward to the day your Majesty returns. The bodies of the remaining soldiers and Maxium blurred. Their magic power was scattered and transferred through the dimensional gate. After a while, they completely disappeared. The spacious wilderness. I remained there alone.